Prologue. Antarctica. January 27, 1956. Admiral Richard Evelyn Byrd stood firm in the blizzard. He wore his practical winter trench coat today, instead of the metal-adorned uniform he usually sported at formal occasions. Leading his men through the snows deep in Antarctica was anything but a posh dinner party, nor was it remotely like a military briefing back home in America. If there was anything at all he had learned, after serving 30 years in the US Navy, it was the appreciation of pragmatic leadership. It's not about how gallantly the mission is accomplished, but that it is accomplished without fail. He waded through the ankle-deep snows with his thick military boots and found himself striding up a small hill, hoping to glance at the wide, desolate landscape. He squinted towards it and looked closely. Blast, I can't see a thing. The snows whirled around him and his men. Despite the observable fact that the sun was in zenith, any prospects of seeing far ahead were abysmal. The blizzard was simply too thick today. He turned around and addressed his men. Corporal Needham. Binoculars, if you may. A scrawny young man, barely 18 years of age from what Byrd could estimate, emerged from the ranks and handed his pair of binoculars over to the admiral. Byrd grabbed the black Bausch and Lomb Army binoculars and proceeded to look into them. I'll be damned. Still not a thing in sight, other than a thick haze of white mist. He handed the scopes back to the young corporal, knelt to the snow, and reflected. We have to go further, with or without a clear line of sight. He gazed upon his platoon and despaired. Green boys. I bet most of them have never seen this much snow or ice in their lives combined. Not that I had first-hand experience of polar weather conditions when I was in their age though. The climate in Virginia is about as mild as they come. 28 years had come and gone since his first Antarctic expedition, but he could recall the voyage to the southernmost outpost of the Earth as if it was yesterday. The same ponderings that haunted him back then came crawling back today. We are not meant to live here. Human life is not suited for this place. After 5 polar expeditions during a span over 3 decades, Byrd's boyish facial features had started to wax and wane, and his hair had turned to a rather dour shade of gray, but his old sentiment still stood the test of time. We are not meant to dwell here. He rose to his feet and tried to push the nostalgic memories away, which surged like shockwaves through his body and soul. It is not time for me to retire just yet. I have a job to do, one final assignment. The rocking chair can wait. He ordered the platoon onwards, and they marched through the snowy inferno. They had arrived with the USS Wyandot 1 month prior. They reached the outskirts of the Ross Ice Shelf and had stayed the night at McMurdo Base. Swiftly thereafter, a hellish long and tiresome walk followed towards the South Pole, which they had reached 2 days ago. We ought to build a base here. A base here at the South Pole, so that people can come and go safely and stay the night with a roof over their heads and proper floor under their feet, here as far south as south goes. It would be reasonable to name it after Roald Amundsen, as long as we don't name the encampment in the honor of Robert Falcon Scott, all is well. If you finish second place, you deserve neither award nor glory. You win, or you lose. There is no middle ground. The orders assigned to him by his superiors were clear and sound, as always. They were to reach the South Pole, and thereafter head forward on foot and emerge on the other side of the continent in the area around Queen Maud Land. They were to settle down at the Norwegian military base at the site and await transport back home to the States. Judging by the briefing in Washington, where Byrd had been assigned the task, this was to be the very first attempt at traversing Antarctica in human history. I better not slip up at the finish line. The platoon marched onwards with all the strength they could muster, and Byrd decided to set up camp after having led his men forward for 2 miles. 2 corporals and a private were in the process of assembling Byrd's large admiral tent when the snowstorm suddenly appeared to fizzle out. The blowing wind abated, and the few snowflakes that fell from the sky were minuscule. Byrd stood with his arms crossed and watched over the sad attempts by his men trying to assemble his tent. Then he turned around and looked out over the plains. The line of sight had improved remarkably just over the course of a few minutes. To his disappointment, what he saw was the same as always. Same old tundra. Same old flat lands and the ever-extending ice, glaciers, and snow in spades. Suddenly, he heard a cry from somewhere ahead of him. "Sir." It was young Corporal Needham, who stood and gazed with binoculars at his position as sentry, about 50 meters ahead of the camp. Bird waded through the thick snow and cut through it like Moses at the Red Sea, with his aging, albeit still fit body. He approached Needham. "What have you seen?" Needham held the binoculars in his right hand. He was trembling. "I don't know, sir. I don't know." "Give me those," commanded Bird. Needham handed the binoculars over to him, and he looked into the optics. "Where should I look?" Needham, still trembling, pointed at the horizon with shaky fingers. "There. Over there, 2:00. Bird squinted and looked directly at 2:00. He saw nothing but the endless, desolate snowy landmass they had wandered through for a whole month. "I see nothing," said Bird. He looked through the optics once more, just for safety. And that was when he saw it. He dropped the binoculars, which fell to the ground with a thud. Bird rubbed his eyes, hoping that what he saw was a mirage. He picked the binoculars up from the snow and looked again. "Dear God. It's not a mirage. It looks like. Could it be? Sweet Mary, Mother of God." Molly Malone's, a modest-looking pub situated at Edington, might be the archetypical Stockholm bar. The sort of pub that is scarcely attended on working days, but on holidays, the crowds flock. A place where worn-out regular customers in their 60s commingle with youngsters in the mood for a pint of Guinness or Kilkenny, forming an unholy alliance in the quest for intoxication in a comfortable locale. The walls were adorned with picturesque images of the Irish countryside and the emblems of the 4 provinces of Ireland: Ulster, Connacht, Munster, and above all Leinster, with its iconic symbol of the harp, which also happens to be the logotype of the brewing company Guinness. John took a sip of his glass left blonde and looked outside the window from the table they were perched. Still, the snow was intense, and degrees below 0 Celsius was to be regarded as the new normal. Every year, still the same damn Swedish winter. And more to come. January just rolled in, after all. "Damn," William said in delight, as he pushed his finished plate of fish and chips away from him on the table. "Solid food here in this joint. Nourishing." "It's all right, I suppose," John said calmly. "All right. Tell me now. Why it is you've brought me here. You do realize that you scared Alma off today with your rantings and ravings?" "I don't even know why I'm here, to tell you the truth. But we are friends still, when all is said and done. And I won't turn a pint of left down, so let's hear it." The atmosphere inside the pub was tense, and the murmur amongst the neighboring table almost drowned out the words spoken by John, but only nearly. William had gotten the gist of it. "All right," said William with a serious look on his face and leant forward over the table towards John. "I will tell you. And you will be convinced. Not tonight, not after just one conversation, but eventually. Once you've done your own research and unlearned old information, and when the passage of time has let the new information sink in. In time you will be convinced, indeed, and not just you, everyone. Everyone in this room, everyone in this country, everyone in Europe, every single person in the world." John stared at him with a confused look on his face. What's with this apocalyptic tone of his? What the hell is he talking about? William leant even closer to John as the middle-aged couple next to them roared with laughter over a joke they couldn't hear. "Have you seen The Matrix, John? You will feel like Neo once he was given the choice by Morpheus to either take the red pill and thus be told about the ugly truth of mankind, and you will have to process it in your own pace. But that comes later once you've taken the red pill and accepted the obvious truth." John rolled his eyes. Another one of William's grand ideas. "I wonder what it is this time. Was it really necessary to start droning on about this mystical, mind-blowing discovery you've made at lunch today? We were supposed to be spending that time by going through the presentation on Huckleberry Finn. Alma didn't get a word out today with her analysis on how Jim is the essential core in Twain's story. You cut her off every time with your cryptic gossip talk about wanting to announce something tonight. I was so excited, John. Okay. Are you surprised that she didn't turn up to this little shindig? Not really, John. Some people just want their lives to go on as they always have. They want to live their lives like a hamster in a wheel, constantly racing forward in the same direction, destined to eternal confinement in their prisons of their own minds. Alma is as bright as they come and an excellent writer and a gold star student for sure, but she is one of those people. She isn't ready for the big leap. She is a blue pill person. But no matter, it was just you I wanted to see tonight." The Matrix references. John had watched The Matrix recently enough to know what it meant to be labeled a blue pill person. The blue pill is the polar opposite of the red pill. Had Neo chosen the blue pill instead of learning the truth that artificial intelligence had taken over and governed mankind for decades, and that his entire life he thought he had lived was but a simulation in a computer, he would have woken up in his bed, and any memory of meeting the mysterious Morpheus erased, and his full life would carry on in blissful ignorance, just as before. Alma is a star and one of the smartest individuals I've ever known. She will save our presentation whether she is a blue pill, red pill, or purple pill inclined person. She is the brightest person I've ever met in the Frascati campus circles. John drifted away from the present and was thrust back into the past. His mind began to wander back to the day when he first laid eyes upon Alma Cronwall, standing there outside entrance C at Stockholm University, smoking a cigarette. That long, black, flowing hair. She appeared to John as the reincarnation of a classic Hollywood star. She looks like Audrey Hepburn would have looked like if her hair was longer. John was over the moon by the fact that Professor Lundstrom had placed the two of them in the same group, along with William in the Literature Studies and Analysis course. It had felt like a gift from above. A golden opportunity granted from the skies, a chance of getting to know her on a personal level. Yeah. Whatever, said William loudly and effectively yanked John back from his dreams of Alma back to the present. Are you going to get to the point yet? John was starting to feel weary about this drawn-out, theatrical prologue his friend was constructing. William stared at him with an intense, primal glare as he adjusted his round glasses. Yes. One last thing, though, to calm the nerves. Be a good lad and order me a shot of whiskey, will you? Speyside Deluxe, if they have it. Good old famous grouse if not. John obeyed and rose to his feet. As he walked to the counter to greet the bartender, he contemplated. What is it he has discovered? What is he so excited about? William Milton had puzzled him on a regular basis over the span of the 6 months they had known one another. John had often wondered why the son of a Lockheed Martin chairman would want to become an English teacher. His father was by all accounts wealthy beyond words, and William was set to one day inherit an empire that would essentially turn him into one of the most influential people in the world, should his father's legacy stay intact once that day came. Becoming an aspiring, underpaid high school teacher did not seem like the most natural next step for someone like that. But I suppose that some people, like God, work in mysterious ways. He sure is a peculiar one, with a style and cadence of his own. I've got to give him that. He's not a follower, and he does not care what other people think of him. He is a genuine freethinker in a sea of followers. Sheep, as he would call them. William always used to wax and wane about one visionary idea after the other. He claimed to have circumnavigated the world 5 years ago, with his father on a yacht, and one would think that his lust for adventure had been satiated after such a momentous undertaking. But John noticed no such signs. He's always hungry for more, it would seem. Always on a quest for knowledge. The bartender poured 2 small glasses of famous grouse smoky black and placed them on the counter. John grabbed them with both hands, elbowed his way forward in the crowded pub, and put the whiskey shots on the table as he took his seat next to William. Okay, John said calmly. Tell it to me now. Tell it all, and tell it true. No more foreplay. William raised a glass of whiskey in the air and downed it all in one fell swoop. Ah. That felt good. Tell me now. Okay, I will tell you. Are you ready? I was born ready. William leant forward again with a wistful gleam in his eyes. Have I mentioned that my father works for Lockheed Martin? John didn't have to think about what to reply. Yes, of course. Many times, how could I not know? He's one of the most influential people in the world. They make advanced space and aeroplane mechanics, among other things. In a nutshell, yes. Why did you wonder if I knew? William slowly stroked the empty glass of whiskey on the table with his pinky finger before he spoke. About a month ago, my father was approached by a certain individual. An anonymous man who presented himself as a curious philanthropist, if I remember my father's words correctly. This individual wanted to invest in a potential project down in Antarctica, you know, the South Pole. He had a plan for a business venture down there and wanted Lockheed Martin to supply him with material, technology, vehicles, and manpower for the project in exchange for a substantial sum of money. My father never did tell me the exact figures, but we are probably talking 8 or even 9 digits here. He also neglected to tell me the exact motives for what the anonymous investor had for setting up shop in Antarctica, but I have my ideas. Alright. What happened next? John's interest was only mildly piqued. Thus far, the whole affair sounded lukewarm at best. Lockheed Martin accepted the offer, and the deal was poised to go ahead when something unexpected happened. The deal was halted by the UN. John was confused. The UN? The United Nations. The very same. Do you know of the Antarctic Treaty? Never heard of it. What is it? William leaned even closer as the bar patrons around him were roaring with laughter amongst themselves. A treaty signed in 1959, penned by the United States, the Soviet Union, and pretty much all other major, influential countries on Earth, 53 in total, if my memory serves me right. Don't you think it's a curious thing? These countries, many of which have been in perpetual conflict and even fought wars against one another, somehow, during all these 6 decades, they have all gotten along just fine when it came down to this treaty. For 60 years, which is essentially a lifetime. I guess you want to know what they have agreed upon, John? John nodded slowly. They decided to cut off the continent of Antarctica ever since the day the treaty was signed, and for all the days to come. It's essentially an untouched landmass under world government quarantine. The actual treaty is a dreadfully boring thing to read. I did power through with it, and I read it all. But amongst all the red tape and the bureaucracy, the purpose of the treaty is clear. Antarctica is to be protected at all costs to prevent independent exploration of the continent, and trespassers will be dealt with in the harshest manner imaginable. For the first time during the whole night at Molly Malone's, John had begun clamoring to William's every word. William couldn't be more pleased that his friend was now paying attention. He smiled wryly and continued. Anyway, 1 month ago, when the 3 representatives dispatched by Lockheed Martin arrived at McMurdo Station in Antarctica to draw out the lands for the project, something peculiar occurred, as I mentioned earlier. They were halted upon Areva by representatives of the UN. Or, to be more precise, New Zealand, which is one of the countries tied to the treaty. One of the Kiwi correspondents promptly informed the Lockheed Martin reps that any sort of business activity down in Antarctica is out of the question, referring to the treaty. The trio were asked to leave immediately and fly back to Christchurch on their private jet, from which they had previously been stopping over from their flight from the States. In other words, they faced the same fate as Andoy did. Who on earth is Andoy? Gerl Andoy, the beleaguered Norwegian skipper. He sailed his yacht to Antarctica a couple of years ago, without the legal permits, and got several of his crewmates killed during the expedition. They died of hypothermia, I think, not sure. Anyway, what happened to his crew is not important. What is important is that he was captured, threatened at gunpoint, and fined by the Antarctic Coast Guard. I'm not making this stuff up, John. It's real. They are guarding something monumental down there, something of paramount importance. I doubt the folks doing the actual guarding even know what they are protecting, ironically enough. I think it's above their pay grade, but that's just my own pet theory. John took a sip from his famous grouse in the gloomy haze of Molly Malone's. And? Is there more to this story? William adjusted his glasses. Don't you think it is at the very least a strange occurrence? This place on Earth, seemingly the most unimportant speck of land on the entire planet, without any indigenous population apart from the emperor penguins, is in fact guarded, as if it was the Holy Grail itself. Don't you think it's curious? John shrugged. Why is it strange? If the treaty dictates that unwanted people, outsiders, are not allowed to tread those grounds, it is fully understandable that those who signed those regulations in the first place elect to uphold the law as they should. That is true, William spoke calmly. But why do you think they chose to isolate the continent to begin with? Is it not the oddest thing, unless there is something of value down there? John looked into his tepid half-empty glass of famous grouse with a pondering expression on his face. I guess it is somewhat curious. From the little I know of Antarctica, it just seems to be this desolate, freezing, miserable place. A place of no importance, in other words. What is it you think? Have they found something of value down there? I know that Nazi Germany set up a base there during World War II, called New Schwabenland, if I am not mistaken. Did they find something game-changing, you think? William showed a hint of a smug, gleaming smile. I do indeed. I believe they found something down there, a long time ago. And I believe this very discovery has been concealed from the public ever since." William looked at his friend and paused for dramatic effect. "If I was to make an educated guess, I would say that this discovery is the reason for the signing of the Antarctic Treaty and a myriad of other important events that shaped the world for the years that followed. Understanding this discovery, this fundamental truth, grants you the knowledge that only a select few are currently in possession of. Accepting this truth is the key to understanding what makes this world tick, and you will in time recognize the smokescreens planted to deceive us, and you will one day decipher the rest of the lies and red herrings out there. The greatest truth of them all, if it became common knowledge, it would change the world as we know it forever." John studied William closely and stared into his crazed big blue eyes with part concern, part curiosity. What the hell is he going on about? William had no plans of stopping just yet. "Do you know of Admiral Byrd, John?" "Never heard of him." "Of course you haven't heard of the man. Richard E. Byrd, Admiral in the US Navy. He led the expeditions to the South Pole during the 40s after the end of the Second World War. The operations under his command were called Operation Deep Freeze and Operation High Jump. These expeditions were carried out with an armada, John. Thousands of soldiers armed to the teeth. What they were looking for is unclear, officially. The jury is still out on that one, if you were to ask any expert historian about this. But from where I am coming, there is no doubt as to what Byrd discovered during his expedition and why the details of this very escapade still are classified as top secret. So what did he discover? He discovered, continued William, as he waved at the bartender for a refill, more land than expected. That stretched further inland than would be possible. There was something wrong. There was something very wrong indeed. The map of the area was inaccurate. The bartender approached the table and filled William's empty glass to the brim. William took a sip and leant even closer to John. "And here, my friend, is where things get interesting. After Operation Deep Freeze in '56, Byrd retires from the Navy. But shortly before his retirement was announced publicly, he went on to do an appearance on live American TV on a show called Longine's Chronoscope. And guess what he goes on to say when asked about his Antarctic expeditions? They found unicorns down there. The Loch Ness Monster. Jimmy Hoffa." John was still all ears, but he began to feel weary over William's incapability of telling a story without relying on theatrics. "No, I'm afraid not," he claimed, and I'm paraphrasing from here on, mind you. He said, "We have found a land mass the size of North America, never once seen by a human being. This area is rich with minerals, coal, and other natural resources. It is quite astonishing that there should be an area as big as that, unexplored." William looked wistfully outside the window of the pub as he recited the words of Admiral Byrd. The street outside looked enchantingly picturesque, almost like taken out of a Disney film. Tiny flakes of snow fell slowly from the skies. "Do you understand what this means, John? What we have here is the admiral who led the very expedition, a national hero and quite possibly the greatest explorer in modern time, claiming that there is an enormous, uncharted swath of land in the deep south out there, ripe for the taking. And this all happened during the 50s. The 50s. By that point, my friend, the world map was since long complete, and every inch of our world was known and measured right down to the last centimeter. What Byrd speaks of should not exist. It can't exist. Do you understand what this means?" John was still confused, and the cheap whiskey he'd been sipping all night didn't exactly help to clear things up. "I don't. What does it mean?" "It means," said William in a raised tone of voice, "it means that the maps are wrong. Not just the map of Antarctica that Byrd and his men realized were not real, but the entire world map. Byrd discovered on that day that all that we until then thought was carved in stone as absolute truth was wrong. Newton, Copernicus, Kepler, Einstein, the whole scientific community was mistaken during all these centuries. Byrd discovered additional land beyond Antarctica. He realized that there's more land to be found beyond, in these regions. And today, it is being covered up and concealed with surgical precision. Millions of people have already discovered this truth across all continents, but to prove it completely is something not yet accomplished. Logistics, resources, time, and money are what is required for that. And I possess all of those, John. I tick all those boxes. I am one in a million." William looked at his confused friend and decided it was the right moment to lay the cards on the table. "There is no gentle or subtle way of telling you this, my friend. So I'm just going to lay it all on the line. The Earth is flat, John Willander. The Earth is flat and stationary, and everything you think you know about the cosmology you have been taught is either a lie or a misconception. The Earth is flat, and outer space as we know it does not exist. And we have absolutely no idea where we are right now. John looked into those big blue eyes and tried to discern if his friend was in the process of pulling some sort of long-winded practical joke at his expense. Alas, there was not even a hint of irony stemming from the words spoken, nor did his face reveal any clue of that nature. John slid his fingers gently on the rim of the empty whiskey glass in front of him, feeling numb. All around them, the noise had become even worse as the company next to them had extended into a large crowd, with two hefty middle-aged women chirping away along with the couple. Jesus Christ. My friend has become one of those people. John had half-heartedly followed the rise of this bizarre underground movement in the peripheries of the dark and obscure corners of the internet. The type of websites and videos I watch now and then on a bored night, somewhere between 2 and 4 a.m. John stroked his long golden hair back and pondered. A flat earther. What is going on with the world? Fewer than 4 years ago, a worn-out reality star in his early 70s had been elected president of the United States. And about the same time, this theory began stirring in the fringes of society. The renaissance of a theory, more hated and ridiculed than anything else in this world, suddenly made a sensational comeback on the world stage after being dead and buried for 500 years. What's next? Flying unicorns? Dogs and cats living together in perpetual harmony? John had read about the celebrities coming out as flat earthers during last couple of years. Tila Tequila, Shaquille O'Neal, rapper B.O.B. While John did not deem any of them as particularly bright, he did recognize it as a sign of things to come. Something is going on, and I cannot for the life of me understand why. The fact that we live on a globe is not up for debate. William, he murmured with a tired, weary voice. Don't tell me that you have really become a flat earther. You have fallen into the trap of a CIA psyop. Don't you get it? It's such an obvious psychological operation, with a distinct purpose of reeling in as many gullible poor sods as possible into the deep dark rabbit hole that is flat earthism. It's crystal clear for anyone with half a brain to see. Tell me that you're joking. Before I keel over and die from overexposure to stupidity. William Milton did not waver. I am completely serious, John. This is real. John fiddled nervously with his smartphone and drank the very last drops of the whiskey. All right then. All right. Only because I do care for you and I am falling into a stupor, which is very fortunate for you, my friend. Because if I wasn't drunk, I doubt I would care to listen to another word of your impending nonsense. But have at it, if you must. John sighed. William leant back in his chair with a more relaxed expression on his face than usual. I won't be able to convince you over just one conversation, John. But I can plant a seed in your brain that something is wrong with the world. Something is very wrong indeed. And whether or not you will be able to run past the hurdles that we call cognitive dissonance is all up to you. Okay then. Fine. For the sake of entertainment. Hit me with your best shot. I'm going to order another cold one and drown it to the tunes of your impending gibberish, if you'll excuse me. William smiled as John walked towards the counter of the bar. As John watched the bartender pouring him a pint of Falcon Export, John looked back at his strange friend and shook his head in disbelief. It's a good thing that I'm drunk tonight. John grabbed hold of the beer and walked back to the corner resolutely. Okay. How did you get caught up in this whirlwind of nonsense? What pushed you over the edge, so to speak? Apart from the chicanery going on in Antarctica and the story of Admiral Byrd. I don't think I'm able to cherry-pick any sort of point that made me flip, it was the sum of all parts. But as for the final nail in the coffin, I can tell you about that. It was when I managed to get in touch with a geodetic surveyor who worked for my father's company not too long ago. I interrogated him rather ferociously over the phone. The old man probably hated having to answer my inane questions for hours on end, but he did comply. He knew who I was, who my father is, naturally, he wouldn't dare to hang up on me. The old codger confirmed everything I needed to know and more. I am 100% convinced that the earth we stand on does not curve downwards. There is no curvature, John. What did he confirm? The surveyor in question is in his late 60s. We spoke about 5 months ago, but I still remember just about everything that he said. During the entire span of his 35-year-old career, he never once, ever, took the curvature formula of the Earth into account during the projects he had been involved in over all those years. He could also not mention a single time any colleague of his had brought it up either. "Do you know the curvature formula of the Earth, John?" John threw his arms out in disbelief. "No. Why would I know that?" Exactly. You don't know that formula. Because we were never taught it in school, or after we finished school for that matter. Stuff like that, we just hand over to the scientists, right? Let the smart guys at NASA figure it out. Let Brian Cox or Bill Nye worry about that, right? Wrong. The learned men of science that we place our faith in. They don't have the faintest clue about a surprisingly large number of basic scientific facts. Let me give you an example. William cleared his throat. Neil deGrasse Tyson, the man universally hailed as the smartest individual walking the earth right now, after the passing of Stephen Hawking, didn't have the foggiest idea when he was asked by Joe Rogan about the formula last year on his podcast. 8 inches per mile squared, for your information. That is the official Earth curvature formula. And it's quite a considerable slope downwards on a ball with a circumference of 24,900. You talk of this as if you were an expert yourself, a scientist. Are you, a spoiled brat in your mid-20s, more qualified to pass judgment on all the scientific and mathematical progress concerning the study of the Earth and just dismiss it all as lies than the people who devote their entire lives studying this very topic? John had no qualms about interrupting his friend so brashly. William raised his glass in a flippant-looking manner and answered without hesitation. Absolutely. Yes, in this case, absolutely. Because the so-called experts, they have been indoctrinated and brainwashed far worse than the common man has been. To them, the shape of the Earth will never, ever be allowed to be put into question. They wouldn't believe it, even if they ascended high enough to see the plane they live on themselves. So even if they are indeed experts and highly qualified in almost every other scientific area, in this case, it is counterproductive, and their decades-long indoctrination has clouded their minds and programmed their brains into a state that is nigh impossible to be yanked out of. It's like they say in The Matrix, John. We never unplug someone who has reached a certain age. Morpheus did not refer to the shape of the Earth in the film, but it has the same bearing. The older and more experienced a person is, the harder it is to wake them up. It's akin to the emperor's new clothes. The Earth has no curvature to be detected, but these experts will still see the curvature in their mind's eye, even though it does not actually exist. It's brilliant. A masterful way of deceiving the public, letting the most trusted men and women fight the battle for you. Useful idiots, if you may. John raised his finger, as if attempting to speak, but William wasn't finished. John. Hear me out now, because this is the most important conundrum in this whole mess, the most important foundation of what makes this conspiracy such an ingenious invention. This spell will likely never be lifted because of one simple truth. Even if the scientists managed to overcome their own programming and they decided to peek behind the curtain, they would never even dream of stepping out of line like that. What would you think would happen if a famous scientist, like Tyson, suddenly declared that the heliocentric model of the universe is indeed false? He would be ostracized, defended, ridiculed. And his entire legacy would be smashed to pieces. The Copernican heliocentric system of the universe is just far too cemented in our society, and that is exactly why a select number of people in the power elite decided to keep this truth under wraps about 60 years ago. John cackled loudly. He could no longer silently watch this freak show go on any further. Out of all the madness that encompasses the flat earth movement, the motive itself for the deception is the most baffling. Why would the governments of the world align for this cause of keeping the real shape of the known world a secret? How does it change anyone's lives if the earth is flat or spherical? People would still have to drag their asses to work every day and slave away for soulless corporations, just like before. Madness. Madness and stupidity. John raised his voice. Why would they waste so much time, money, and effort in keeping this so-called ultimate truth a secret? Listen to yourself speak, my man. There is no motive in lying about the shape of the earth. A deception only makes sense if the conspirators gain something out of it. There literally is no motive in convincing the public that the earth's geometrical shape differs from what we have been told. Au contraire, my dear John. William sounded annoyingly smug and confident, and John did not care for it one bit. You can't see the motive. That's all right. I couldn't see it either at first, but in time I saw it, clear as day. I was blind, and now I see. All the pieces matter, and suddenly they all fit just right. Like in a jigsaw puzzle. Explain it to me, then. Help me understand. Why would they lie? You're asking the wrong question, John. The real question to ask yourself is this. Why would they speak the truth? William grinned and cleared his throat. Try picturing, if you can, the historical timeline of the scientific progress of this place we call home. Earth. Thousands of years ago, pretty much all ancient civilizations knew that the earth was flat. The Aztecs, the Egyptians, the Hindus, the Navajo, the Inca, the Maya. And of course, our own Norse ancestors. This status quo reigned supreme until Pythagoras hypothesized the idea of the earth being a sphere in around 500 BC. He was the first major player in history who brought up that the earth was not flat or stationary. A man before his time, for sure. The idea did not become widespread outside of Greece, and even in his homeland it only had a minor following. It would take a long time until the ball earth we know and cherish took hold for real. Let's fast forward a couple of years. A millennium, to be precise. You still with me, buddy? John nodded. I'm listening. Good. Like I said, one millennium came and went. And this is when Aristotle and Plato emerged from their previous states of mediocrity and started to make wild predictions about the cosmology of our world. While those two believed that the earth was spherical, they did not believe that Tellus orbited the sun. Aristotle's theory was geocentric. Meaning, the sun, the moon, and the other celestial bodies circled around the spherical earth in space. But it was only about a century later, around 250 BC, when the spherical earth was cemented as absolute truth and not just conceived of as a mere thought experiment. The person who should be credited for this happening is the mathematician and philosopher Eratosthenes, who stepped into the limelight with his famed experiment of shadows and sun rays, which is used to this very day as absolute proof of the ball earth. John shrugged. I bet you wonder how the experiment worked out. I'll tell you how. They measured the shadow angles in two different cities during the solstice at noon. In the cities of Alexandria and Cyan. Eratosthenes was in Cyan while his assistant was dispatched to Alexandria. In Cyan at noon, Eratosthenes noted that the sun cast no shadow on the well he stood next to. The sun's rays pierced through the bottom of the well. At the same time in Alexandria, his assistant mounted a vertically aligned iron pole in the ground. And the assistant saw that clearly a large shadow was cast on the pole. The assistant hurried back to Cyan and reported his findings to an overjoyed Eratosthenes, over the moon by the fact that his experiment turned out to be successful. During the days to come after the experiment, he sat down in his study and crunched the numbers. He calculated the circumference of the earth by taking into consideration the length of the shadow cast in Cyan and a presumed distance to the sun of several million miles away. And settled on a number that is still today near identical to the official figure for the circumference of our planet. 24,900 miles. The facts are, though, and even our good friend Neil deGrasse Tyson will agree with this, that if the sun were not in fact 93 million miles away as the official distance currently stands at, this experiment would work just as well on a flat and immovable Earth. And don't even get me started on how Eratosthenes completely ignored the element of refraction in his calculations. In any case, his false premise led to a faulty conclusion. If the sun were in fact not 93 million miles away, but much closer and much smaller, casting a localized ray of light, the experiment works on both a plane and a sphere. The math checks out. You following, mate? I'm still listening, yes, said John calmly. Tonight, I will imbibe this pseudoscientific lecture like a junkie inhaling his favorite drug and forget it all by tomorrow morning. Good, my friend? Very good. Do tell me if I get sidetracked. That happens too easily with me. We were talking about the timeline, yes. The timeline. Let us now leap forward many years, to the 17th century to be precise. The century that saw the rise of a certain Sir Isaac Newton of the Royal Society. I trust you've heard of this chap, John. John nodded. By this time and age, the sphericity of the Earth was no longer theory, but cold hard fact. The debate was done. Columbus and Magellan had successfully circumnavigated the world, and Copernicus had all but finalized the heliocentric model that we know and follow to this very day. There were questions left to be answered, yes, such as gravity. But as for the shape of the world, It was a closed and shut case. There was no longer a need for scholars like Aristotle to evangelize his globe earth ideas on a town square to a horde of clueless, uneducated crowds. The only people who would even think twice of putting their stock in the belief of a flat earth by this century were most likely regarded as the troglodytes or Neanderthals of their time. In other words, only technicalities were left to be argued for. Newton advanced his theories of gravitation, and Einstein finalized them about 300 years later with his theory of relativity. But here's the pickle, John. What if all of these learned, extremely talented men of their age were simply wrong? What if they had overthought the whole process? John cringed in his seat. Why would they have been wrong? Or are they in on the conspiracy too? These people, my friend, dedicated their entire lives studying science, and they all followed the scientific method. How could so many brilliant men during the span of thousands of years get something so monumentally wrong as failing to correctly guess the real shape of the earth? William just continued smiling, and it got on John's nerves. Why is he so smug? He's a bloody flat earther. He should be squirming in his seat. Let me tell you of a common practice in the medicinal community called bloodletting that happened to be in fashion back in the day. I'm sure you've heard of it. The entire scientific community truly, and honestly, madly, deeply, believed that bloodletting would cure whatever malady their patient was suffering from. This alone should tell you everything you ought to know about how terribly wrong the scientific community has been over the centuries. Now of course we know for an absolute fact that bloodletting did far more harm than good as a sort of cure. Jesus goddamn Christ, John. The doctors of yore actually thought that draining blood, as if they were vampires, would actually heal them. We're cursing now. Never heard you curse before. You must be mighty passionate about this. Oh, you know I am. The smug grin of an all-knowing zealot just wouldn't wash away. He's just like a Scientologist or a fresh recruit of the Jehovah's Witnesses. Here's another example I thought of just now, John. During the Great Plague of London, towards the end of the 1600s, what do you think the trusted scientific community of Great Britain did? Who were to be blamed? I don't know. Some minority population. Gypsies? Jews? William cackled. No such thing. This happened about 280 years before the rise of Adolf Hitler. No, they blamed and called cats. Yes. The cats. When the real culprits were, you guessed it, rats. Rats were the carriers of the bacteria, and the brilliant limeys decided for some god-forsaken reason to call the poor cats of London instead. And in turn, making the problem even worse. I mean, everyone knows that the cat is a rat's worst enemy. How incompetent they were, how clueless. William's keen eyes spied that John had started to drift away somewhat during the conversation of mice and men, so he decided to yank him back to the topic at hand with a vengeance. But I am not here to drone on about rats, cats, zebras, or lions or go off on a zoological tangent Attenborough style. I was making a point here, John. The point is this. To blindly trust the consensus of the scientific community 2 millennia ago is simply madness. Folly. And yet, that is what we believe in this case. We believe that we live on a spinning ball because the ancient Greeks already figured that out. Ain't that so? Scientists are people, just like you and I. Even with good intentions, they are not strangers to faulty conclusions. And that includes Pythagoras, Eratosthenes, Cavendish, Galileo, Newton. And Albert Einstein, in particular. I have a hard time seeing it, said John bluntly. John, there were people even in the late 1800s and towards the early 1900s who adamantly opposed the consensus of a spherical Earth. But I bet you've never heard of those people because they don't teach us about them in school. Like Dr. Samuel Burley Rowbottom, an Englishman who attempted to disprove the globular Earth hypothesis with his famed Bedford-level experiment in the late 1800s. His experiments showed quite clearly that the elusive Earth curvature simply did not exist, and therefore we live on a plane. But nobody listened. There were no ways of trading information swiftly and easily like there is today. Thank heavens that we live in an age when the internet has been ushered in. Never heard of this fellow? Well, of course you haven't, and you haven't heard of him because of something I have hammered home in this conversation several times already. The game is rigged, so to speak. We are programmed at an early age to believe something, and the curriculum of the education system will follow the same line to a T during your entire childhood. Once you have reached adulthood, it's nigh impossible to think outside the box when it comes to these matters. William sighed loudly, but if he was exhausted by turning a regular Friday night at Molly Malone's into a disjointed sermon of his obscure belief, he showed no signs of it. He was merely gathering more strength to deliver his next blow that would knock John over for good. "I'm going to drop a quote on you now, and I want you to guess who said it." "All right." John exhaled and muttered slowly with a tone that implied indifference. "All right, fine. Einstein's theory of relativity is a magnificent mathematical garb which fascinates, dazzles, and makes people blind to the underlying errors. The theory is like a beggar clothed in purple, whom ignorant people take for a king. Its exponents are brilliant men, but they are metaphysicists rather than scientists." John, being mildly intoxicated, felt like shooting from the hip on this one. "Stefan Laufen." William laughed loudly over the mere thought of the current prime minister being a critic of Albert Einstein. Or even daring to speak out on scientific matters at all, beyond bragging about how he was such an excellent welder in his glory days. "Good one." "No, I'm afraid not. It was Nikola Tesla. You know, Tesla Motors. The company run by Elon Musk." "Of course I know who Elon Musk is, and I also know of Nikola Tesla. No need to talk to me as, what was it you called the poor sods who believed the earth was flat during the dawn of enlightenment?" "Ah, yes. Troglodytes. Anyway, just because Tesla thought Einstein's theories were poor does not mean that they are not true. That's a logical fallacy if you start thinking like that. They were bitter rivals at the time and Tesla had more than a touch of narcissism, don't you think? That alone might explain why he had such a low opinion of Einstein." "Of course. It might. But that does not change the extraordinary fact that Nikola Tesla, one of the brightest minds who ever walked the earth, held the unwavering stance that the theory of relativity that we all know and love today was garbage. Hot garbage. Remember, as of today, relativity is no longer a theory in the eyes of the scientific community. It is cold hard fact. Like evolution. Yeah, because Einstein figured it all out. Relativity is fact. It is indeed. For the vast majority of Earth's population. 99%. Heck, maybe even 99.9%. But it is not fact for me, at least not until it is unequivocally proven. To quote Tywin Lannister, a lion does not concern himself with the opinions of sheep. Who the hell is Tywin Lannister? John had never heard of this historical figure. You and your bloody quotes. They never end, do they? Jesus, John. Have you never watched Game of Thrones? William sighed. "No. Never." "Wow. You've been living under a rock these past 8 years for sure. Tywin is the patriarch of House Lannister. The point is that it does not matter what the masses think if the thought process of those individuals is flawed. A lie is still a lie, even if everyone believes it, and something that is true, even though nobody happens to believe it." John just looked at him with a blank stare, so William continued. "In any case. Thanks to Einstein, who arrived like the second coming, piecing together the last missing link of how the universe works, there was no debate from then onwards of where we are right now. We stand on a spinning ball, everything is relative, there is no up or down in space, and we are hurling, tilting, wobbling, and spinning through the universe in speeds you can't even imagine if you tried your hardest. Until what? Until we develop technology advanced enough that we one day were able to launch a craft high enough in the sky to observe if all the centuries of mathematical equations and all the serpentine, convoluted ideas and theoretical constructs were actually true. So, then the question becomes, what if they turned out to not match reality, if the earth turned out to be flat and they reached some kind of dome in the sky, or whatever it is you nutty folks believe is going on up there? They would have told the public about it. What they wouldn't have done is sit down and plan out elaborate hoaxes to deceive the world for all the years to come, like the moon landings and the International Space Station," said John. "Would they not? I'm not smitten by your ill-founded faith in the ruling elite, John. The same ruling class who brought down 3 towers via controlled demolitions when we were just kids almost 20 years ago. The same elite who are currently spraying barium and strontium in the skies, the very same ruling class who control and modify the weather from the HARP facility in Alaska. And God knows what they have cooking in CERN over at Switzerland. Christ, John. Stick to one theory at the time, please. My brain was overheating just fine already before you brought chemtrail talk and the like into the mix." "All right, John. I will," said William and cleared his throat. You have to admit that even though the 1950s were a long time ago and their technology is, with our standards of today, ridiculously outdated, it still would have toppled the power structure of the entire world if the Earth turned out to be flat. Society would collapse, and anarchy, chaos, and disorder would reign as the eyes of the world would shift from petty squabbles between nations to a joint effort of exploring the new discovered lands beyond Antarctica. And if there is indeed some kind of barrier surrounding us, an edge, if you will, the only thing people would care about is to penetrate that barrier and discover what is outside of this realm. Like Truman did in The Truman Show. Because once Truman discovered that his whole life was a lie, a staged television show, everything changed for him. All that mattered from the moment his ship hit that solid brick wall was to get to the other side and find out the truth of where he was. And before you roll your eyes over my movie references, John did indeed roll his eyes. Truman Show? Truman Show is a damned movie. This is real life. Planet Earth is not a Hollywood set or a stage show. We're supposed to be living in 2020, damn it, William. Even though it was indeed just a movie, the same rules would apply if something like that would happen in real life. It's within our nature as humans. If we are fenced in, we want to know why the fence was built, who built it, and what lies beyond the fence. The quest for ultimate knowledge is what separates us from all other species on Earth. Animals of lesser intelligence, like sheep or cows, would not question why they are caged. They would accept it quickly and get on with their day. But we are not like cows, are we? There would be panic. There would be violence. There would be confusion. Where are we, John? What lies beyond the shorelines of Antarctica? As you now hopefully understand, John, the most logical decision here, the lesser of two evils, if you will, is to tell the public the exact opposite of the truth, to keep them in line. It was the only way to make sure the old paradigm continued. John was not laughing anymore. He looked deeply into his empty glass of whiskey and pondered. I have to admit. This makes sense. It does make sense, somehow. I can't even put my finger on why it makes sense, but it does. William talking about flat Earth theory and making sense while doing so. I must be living in the twilight zone. The Earth sure as hell isn't flat though. But if it was, his line of reasoning isn't half as bad as I thought it would be. I don't know if it's because I'm tipsy, tired, or simply more absent-minded than usual on this day, but in that very hypothetical scenario that you are painting, I could actually see how your argument could strike a chord in the hearts of gullible folks. Order and stability based on a lie is, in some extreme cases, better than the alternative. Sometimes the cold hard truth can do more damage than good. I can see it, the rest I cannot, you lunatic. Good luck convincing me on the rest. Oh, I'm not expecting you to flip over this one conversation, John. I thought I hammered that point home repeatedly, did I not? This takes weeks, months, could even take years. Let me give you one last example before we wrap up this night out, if you will allow me to. Sure. Thank you. I am going to just throw something out there for you to chew on as you go to sleep tonight, and I implore you to really think this through, okay? An example of why I don't trust the science we are given today. You know how we were taught in school of the inner layers of planet Earth? You know, the inner mantle, outer mantle, the crust, the core, so on, so forth. All that jazz. I remember, yes. I remember my teacher telling us that if you were to drill a hole right through the Earth, you would eventually emerge in Australia or something on the other side. I know, of course, that's just a metaphysical idea, but did you know that the deepest hole ever drilled only went 8 miles down? The Ruskies pushed the envelope in their core borehole project in the 80s, and they still only reached 8 miles down. 8 miles. The distance to the center of the Earth is allegedly about 4,000 miles, so you do understand that they literally just scratched the surface. It's nothing. It really is nothing, and the idea that our trusted scientists know exactly what is going on beneath our feet gets more ridiculous by the day. The more you research this topic, John, I'm telling you, the deeper down the rabbit hole you go, the more you realize that what you thought you know, you don't know. If there is any conclusion I have made thus far, it is that very realization. That I know nothing. We know nothing. I have come to realize that the people who claim to know everything are the ones you should avoid. Like Neil deGrasse Tyson. John protested. What do you mean? Why are you so against Tyson? Did he steal your parking slot years ago in a galaxy far, far away? It's nothing personal, really. I imagine he's a decent guy in private, aside from the bloated ego and his misguided belief that he was gifted with a towering intellect. How can he, or any other scientist for that matter, presume to know how the inner layers of Saturn, Neptune, or Venus are like from the comfort of an armchair in his luxurious home in Manhattan? Ah, the arrogance. The arrogance, John. The arrogance radiated from these guys in their white lab coats, who think they deserve an elevated position in the social pyramid because they have PhDs and learned how to scribble down more advanced math equations on a piece of paper than the average Joe ever could. Do you think Tyson has ever been to space? Hawking? Dawkins? Nye? Cox? Carl Sagan? Let me tell you a secret. None of them have been there. Only about 500 people have allegedly gone to space. Which isn't that many, when you think about it. 500 people. While only 69 people were convicted of conspiracy charges in the Watergate scandal, nearly 1,000 were estimated to be in the know. Who knows what would have happened had Bernstein and Woodward not investigated the matter. Maybe Nixon would have gotten away with it all. What I am saying is, keeping 500 people silent is not as hard as you might think it is, historically. With the right incentive, it would be in their best interest to keep their mouths shut if they were told, say, that the fate of the world would be at stake, should they talk. Yeah, but they all got found out, though. Nixon and his cronies. If NASA faked the moon landings, for instance, they've done a pretty damned good job keeping it under wraps for over 50 years. That's a good point, John. But the magnitude of what we are talking of here far eclipses Watergate, wouldn't you say? Everything pales in comparison to the deception of keeping the real shape of the Earth a secret. I suppose you're right, on a hypothetical level. William slammed his fist on the table. Listen to me now, because this is important. Those planets and stars they claim to know what they consist of, their exact weight and mass and distance from us, it's all conjecture. A mathematical construct. And they are wrong, oh so wrong. Every bit of research I do points to it. We don't know what the wandering stars are. They could be circular, non-spherical tiny luminaries in the sky from what I can tell, but I'm not making any absolute calls on the matter until the day I know for sure. Which I doubt will ever happen. But I would bet the farm on that, they aren't terra firma, and that there is certainly no cute little NASA rover driving around on Mars via remote control from Houston. Isn't it a curious case? Neither of us, nobody we know, likely nobody on this Earth, will ever set foot on Mars. Yet, if you were to ask the man on the street if Mars could be visited, they would swear on their grandmother's grave that it is indeed the case, and that we will have boots on that red ground in a couple of years from now, and that we will colonize it before 2030. It's a fantasy. Our five senses tell us that those shining circles in the sky are just distant lights. Earth is what matters, but the brainwashed masses think colonizing some speck of light in the sky is more important because they watched a Matt Damon movie set there. Sure. While intrigued by William's filibustering, his desire to sleep like a log got the better of him. John yawned and pulled up his Samsung Galaxy S7 and looked at the clock. 0:47. Time to shut this tinfoil hat session down, I think. John put his thick gloves on and bade William farewell. William. It's been a pleasant evening. Albeit maybe a touch of too much obscurity for my taste. I am too tired right now. Got to head home. William nodded, and they put on their coats, wished the bartender a good night, opened the front door, and found themselves standing in the midst of what could only be described as a snowy inferno. An icy gust of wind came hurling through the street towards them, and John covered his eyes as best he could. I can't get back to my warm comfy bed soon enough. John. William shouted, as the cold winds drowned out the noise. We'll see one another again. Soon. And write to me later about the Huckleberry Finn essay on Skype or in text. We got it covered, no problems. And good luck with your courtship of Alma. William smiled all-knowingly as John flinched with a forced confused expression on his face. Come on, my friend. I'm not blind. William smiled and waved him farewell, and the two parted ways. John started walking as quickly as he could. I'll get there in about 5 minutes, if I make a run for it. As he was about to turn left on Adengaton and make his way up on the Lagaton, he heard a faint cry from behind him. It was William. John. I know you're skeptical of everything I told you tonight, and you will likely brush it all off for the time being, and your average life problems will take up your thoughts, for a while. But in the end, I can promise you, you will see things differently, and you will understand what I'm talking about. Good night. Yeah. Bloody likely. John yawned and started walking up the slope towards his street, Delagaton 62. Right now, I don't care if the earth is flat, spherical, a cube, or even fidget spinner shaped. All I want is a long night's sleep. And cursed be the one who stands in my way from achieving just that. Jesus H. Christ. What on earth did I drink last night? Chloroform, Valium, absinthe. John opened his eyes slowly and felt a throbbing pain tingling through his body. He touched his forehead and cringed. It feels like a giant dropped an anvil on my head and left me for dead. A glob of dead meat for the vultures to feast on. He reached for his mobile phone with a trembling hand and looked at the clock. 11:12 a.m. He mustered all the strength he could find within and rose to his feet and waddled towards the bedside window. The curtains were drawn and the clear sunlight shone through the thick glass. John looked outside and saw the glistering, snow-covered Vasaparkin in its full glory. The snows had stopped falling and it was a bright, beautiful winter day. A winter wonderland. The park was crowded with ice skaters and hockey players on the ice field. John donned his beige housecoat and managed to drag himself into the kitchen. This was a cumbersome task indeed. Still in his zombified, hungover state of being, the pursuit for a cure was on. He opened the cupboards hoping to find aspirin. Finding none, his last hope was the fridge. Damn. It's as good as empty. No pick-me-up drink for me today. Distraught and in ill mood, John started opening the cupboards again, hoping that he would have better luck this time, when the phone in his right pocket rang. Yes, hello, he muttered drowsily. Good morning, John. Are you in school? Just splendid. My dearest mother. I'm so not up for this right now. No, Mom. My next lecture is at 3, luckily. I have some things to attend to before then. Like scurrying back to bed and bury myself under the blanket in fetal position, while praying that I will feel better in a couple of hours from now. So, you're at home? Wonderful. Go now and water the spider chrysanthemum in the living room so you don't forget it later. A beauty like that needs the gentlest of care. The spider Chris. What? My brain is clearly not fully operational yet. It's too bloody early in the morning for this nonsense. What in the living daylights is a spider crystal wand? Spider chrysanthemum. Don't be silly. The large purple flower I gave you last week, of course. I put it on the mantelpiece in the living room. Have you forgotten? Oh no. You haven't tossed it out, have you? Good gracious me. John waltzed through his apartment and found himself in the living room and looked around. Oh, there it was. I see it now. Beautiful thing. I had forgotten it. His mother sighed loudly on the other end. You're so airheaded, John. You need structure and order in your life. When will you achieve that? When hell freezes over, probably. I'm in full control of my life. Ha. You don't even own a calendar, do you? Sadly, her assumption is close to the mark. Of course I do, Mother, John lied. Do you have anything in particular to say, or are you just calling to torment me over trivialities? I just called to check in. I worry about you, John. Sometimes I wonder if you will ever find the right course in life. Don't drift through life aimlessly like your father did. You don't want to end up like him, said Johanna Willander softly. No, I most certainly do not. On that point we are in full agreement. John had not spoken to his father for many years, and he did not miss him. She did the right thing, leaving him. He was unstable. John's father Alexander worked as a solicitor during his heyday, when his parents were still married. Gosh, it must be 8 or 9 years since I last heard from him. Alexander Willander had vices that eventually got the better of him. After gambling his entire life savings away one drunken night at Casino Cosmopol, he became an embittered drunkard who spent his days at home hitting the bottle, and eventually Johanna had enough. That was 9 years ago. Don't worry about me, Mom. I will find a way. I hope so. Take care of yourself, John. John breathed a sigh of relief. What should I do now? A warm cup of tea with honey wouldn't be too bad. I'll put the kettle on. And then the phone suddenly rang once again. John looked at the display and groaned. William. Intriguant number 2. Can't they just leave me in peace? I'm being persecuted here. William Melton, I presume. Or should I call you Ferdinand Magellan, the legendary explorer? In light of your rantings and ravings last night about hidden landmasses and American admirals going haywire down at the South Pole. It would be an honor, John. Listen up. William paused for dramatic fashion. There is a person I'd like you to meet. That I want the both of us to meet, in fact. Tomorrow. Who? I have things to do. Like our project in class, remember? Or have you thrown in the towel completely? Is it common for flat earth converts to abandon their work once they've seen the light? John cackled, mockingly. Our work there can wait. Listen up here. I have set up a meeting with a certain Dr. Celeste Wood at the Royal Institute of Technology, said William. Who on earth is Dr. Wood, and why are we going to RIT? Wait. Does this have anything to do with what we discussed last night? Oh, you betcha. William made no attempts at concealing how thrilled he was. John could literally hear him huffing and puffing excitedly on the other end, like that of a child unwrapping the first Christmas present of the year. John sighed loudly. William, I am telling you, whatever it is you think you are onto. You are chasing your own tail with this. I have been proven wrong about some things in my life, and some hard stances I've taken, I have regretted. But I am right about this. However, my calendar for tomorrow is pretty much smack empty. If I'm in the right mood, I guess I could tag along. This shindig, whatever it is that you've set up, better be more interesting than my previous plans, binging Netflix shows at home. I guarantee you that it will be. The rendezvous with Dr. Wood is at 1 p.m. sharp, so we'll meet by the fountain at the courtyard at 12:45. Deal? Deal. And another thing. Before you tuck in tonight, pull up YouTube and plow through some material of my choosing. What material? Look into the material on these channels from these guys, Jiren Campanella, David Weiss, and Mark Sargent. Are those chess players? Pig farmers? Wine connoisseurs? Not exactly, squeaked William. Just look into it before the meeting. As a personal favor. Sure. I'll look it up. I might skip the lecture at 3 with Professor Halton. I mean, I still have the project to work on. Put that aside for one day, will you? I suppose I could. Of course you can. Put your tinfoil hat on, John. We're going down the rabbit hole tomorrow. See you then. That sounded ominous. But what else to expect from this oddball than the unexpected? I have an inkling that I'm in for something bizarre tomorrow. John poured himself a cup of green tea and walked back into his study towards his computer chair. Just when he stepped into his room, his left foot got stuck in the doorsill and he fell uncontrollably downward, head first. With a loud thud, his body crashed down on the hard parquet floor, writhing in pain in his left shoulder, which he landed on. He looked up and saw that his beloved cup had shattered into dozens of pieces. He managed to pick himself up slowly and gazed at the mess on the floor. My beloved Winston Churchill mug. It's been with me for 5 bloody years, ever since I visited the church war rooms in London. As the hot liquid content of the broken mug splayed across the floor and seeped into the white rug in the center of the room, he thought of the iconic Churchill quote that was written on the mug. History will be kind to me, for I intend to write it myself. He went back into the kitchen and opened the freezer and grabbed a fistful of ice cubes and placed them on his aching left shoulder. No. Screw the Professor Ulf Halton lecture in English syntax. I intend to stay at home and blaze through what William told me to watch. What else do I have cooking anyway? Why not? John walked back into the study and waited over the tea-drenched rug without a care in the world. He took a seat in the chair, logged on to his Asus computer, and opened the web browser. He then visited YouTube and searched for one of the names. And quickly realized that he had entered one of the more obscure chambers of what is called the internet. Welcome. Dr. Celeste Wood, PhD in theoretical astrophysics at the Stockholm Royal Institute of Technology, opened the door to her study. She had but a hint of an American accent, John thought. Had I not known she was foreign, thanks to the name that gave it away, I almost wouldn't have guessed. She appeared to be in her late 30s, had short brown hair, and was elegantly clad. She took off her reading glasses and placed them on her spacious desk in the west side of the large oval room, facing the windows, overlooking the university courtyard. Which one of you lads goes by the name of William Milton? William gently raised his hand. I do, Dr. Wood, he said jovially. We've had some quality correspondence these past couple of months over email, have we not? Celeste Wood smiled. Call me Celeste, please. And we did indeed. My question was but a courtesy. Of course I knew it was you. We traded photographs of one another, and I never forget a face. John moved forward smoothly to shake her hand. John Willander, he said. We're in the same class, William and I. Ah. Upper grad English teacher in the making, you too. Precisely. Commendable line of profession, teaching kids. I say commendable in the sense that I find it gallant that people would willingly put themselves through a 5-year-long chore to graduate, only to end up an underpaid low-level worker, stuck in nightmarish conditions every day, no doubt. Sorry. I shouldn't rain on your parade. If you both have decided it's your calling in life, then by all means, do pay heed to that decision and follow through. I'm just saying. I have experience in the field you will spend your days at, and for the most part, it ain't pretty. I don't want to think about my future career prospects right now. It makes me anxious. It's too far away, too remote. Too intangible. I don't even know if I want to be a teacher one day. Hell, I only picked it due to peer pressure and a lack of alternatives that were better at the time. I have to say, your Swedish is very good. More than adequate. You could have been born here, almost. John paused. Where in the States are you from? Boston, Massachusetts. I moved to Sweden 7 years ago, along with my husband, Perry. I received a job offer hereabouts and I thought, why not? I needed a change. A fresh start. Things had gotten a bit troublesome at Emerson College, where I worked prior to this. Infighting, funding cuts, you name it. I barely knew a thing about Sweden, but when the offer arrived, well, let's just say that I didn't mind going as far away from there as possible. Celeste saw John eyeballing the framed photograph next to them, hanging on the wall next to her diploma from Emerson College. The picture depicted a robust man in his mid-40s, lovingly embracing two girls who looked near identical to John's keen eyes. That's my husband. And yes, they are twins. You're not a genius, if you so guessed, Mr. Willander. John. My name's John, we can disperse with the titles, since you set the bar for that yourself. Couldn't have put it better myself, John. Let us continue. Where were we? About to get to the matter at hand, said William loudly from the back. First off, thank you for granting me, and my reluctant friend here an audience. John rolled his eyes. An audience? How very pompous that sounds. I may be an astrophysicist for 15 years now, but that doesn't make me the Pope, does it? Said Celeste, and took a seat behind the large wooden desk. Well, I figured your schedule must be pretty packed, would it not? Someone with your stature surely has requests from left and right to tend to, and lectures to hold. You're not wrong, William. But you caught me in an opportune moment. I have a couple of hours to spare for sure, she said and glanced at the beautiful solid oak pendulum clock at the wall, and surmised that she had about 3 or 4 hours of leisure time today. Jolly good. So, I'd like to cut to the chase, said John and raised his voice. William brought me here because he thought you could change my mind about something. The two of you share the same, fringe worldview, so to speak. Is this accurate? Celeste's smile was as good as wiped off, just as soon as those words were uttered, and she glanced at him with a stern look on her face. That is true. We've been in touch for several months about this. Somehow it is much easier to open up about one's secrets over the internet than it is face to face, despite the fact that both of us were complete strangers and anonymous as well. Eventually William gained my trust enough, to the degree that I was comfortable to share my real identity with him, and he did the same. You will understand that in no way, shape, or form are you, or William, to disclose what we will talk of in this room today. Not a soul. My reputation and image would be shattered if it was known what I personally believe about Cosmos, rather than the official version that I actually teach to students. As a wise man once said, reputation takes a lifetime to build and only seconds to destroy, said William, proud that he was able to finish her sentence. We both understand perfectly. He looked at John, who nodded back. Our lips are sealed. How exactly did you get to know William? If you could be more precise. Just curious, asked John. Celeste complied. On an internet forum, wherein this topic was brought up. We were thrust into a lengthy argument concerning Foucault's pendulum, and then some time later we got to know one another by sending private messages over time. We eventually formed a strong, lasting bond. He's a good lad. William blushed. You're too kind, Dr. Wood. I told you, it's Celeste. For the last time. Celeste. I admit that I was sure you were pulling my leg when you first wrote about your credentials. Surely, a renowned astrophysicist would not argue against the heliocentric model of the universe in the comments section of some cesspool website. I did not believe you until you sent me pictures of your diplomas. There are many on the internet who assume false identities for some personal gain, usually money scams. And I did not think you were the William Milton, Oscar's son. Everyone knows of your father, of course. He's one of the richest men in Sweden and by far the nation's wealthiest entrepreneur. One could even argue that he is the Elon Musk of this country, although I am hesitant to use his name as a compliment these days. I did not know that he had a son until I looked it up. It was you indeed. Where is your father as of now? I seem to recall reading something in the paper the other day about a Lockheed Martin conference in the Far East. That is true. Lockheed Martin is launching a new, as of yet secret project in Asia, and he is currently in Jakarta. He was there when last we spoke, anyway. A couple of days passed, I couldn't swear it on my life that he's still there, as I am not privy to his travel schedule. I sure wouldn't mind trading places with him. I would take the humid, blazing heat of Indonesia any day over this freezing spell we have to survive through over here in the Venice of the North. John anxiously fiddled with his set of keys in his left pocket. I want to get this show on the road now. Let's get this freak show over with sooner rather than later. He decided to rock the status quo. Dr. Wood, I mean Celeste, he added when he saw her raising a finger as if to correct him. Celeste. An astrophysicist denying the heliocentric model. Isn't that something of an oxymoron? Absolutely. No doubt about it, said Celeste with a chuckle. Kind of like a football coach who hates football or a bank clerk who hates money. So, you can imagine exactly how arduous and painful this process has been for me, reaching this conclusion. A conclusion drawn that I never would have seen coming if I so lived to be 100. Celeste walked slowly to the drawer behind the desk and grabbed hold of a large globe Earth model on a stand and placed it on the desk. She put her hand on that dusty miniature model and looked at it closely. That this Earth we call home, this blue marble, is nothing but a fantasy, fiction, an illusion. Call it whatever you like, the point is that we have all been hoodwinked and the Earth cannot be a sphere. It simply cannot, as it does not hold up under scrutiny. And if something is incorrect, it needs to be corrected. No matter the costs. Let justice be done, though the heavens fall. The famous quote by Jim Garrison in front of the jury at the JFK trial, pleading to the masses that Lee Harvey Oswald could not have possibly been the lone gunman. I'm starting to like her already. She placed both hands on the globe and spun it as quickly as she could. 1,000 miles per hour, they say we are spinning at this very second. 1,040 miles per hour, to be exact. Meanwhile, she leaned over to the window and looked up in the skies. Meanwhile, we are also orbiting the sun at the whopping speed of 67,000 miles per hour, while the whole solar system is hurling through the Milky Way at the insane speed of 448,000 miles per hour. Does the lunacy end there, you think? It does not. In addition, the Milky Way is also in motion, racing towards the so-called Great Attractor. At the Behemothian speed of 1.3 million miles per hour. John looked at her speechless. How did I not know of this? I thought I had a decent grip on how the universe worked. I did not have a clue about this very fundamental scientific data. My friends. We are dealing with numbers so preposterous that when analyzing it with a fine-tooth comb, you realize that the entire cosmological model we have been taught is an insult to our collective intelligence. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proofs, as they say. And the proofs simply aren't there to be found. Even the great Albert Einstein, hailed universally as the man of the century, never performed a single experiment to prove any of his claims. He only dealt in theories. So, what we are left with is mathematics and conjecture. Even the renowned George Ellis admits to this. I know who George Ellis is. What did he say, exactly? Would a leading figure within the field of theoretical cosmology admit that the heliocentric model is just a mathematical construct without basis in reality? I find that rather hard to believe, said John. I was merely paraphrasing. What did he say then, exactly? What I want to bring into the open is the fact that we are using philosophical criteria in choosing our models. A lot of cosmology tries to hide that, she quoted. Intriguing. I thought for sure that the scientific method, at its core, was invented as a way to let go of archaic belief systems and pre-packaged conceptions that would get in the way of truthful, scientific discovery. I suppose scientists can be corrupted, like any mortal. Celeste walked away from the window and took a seat in her chair once again. Had I been told that I would stand here and slam the very foundations of science a year ago, I would have laughed you out of the room. And yet, here I stand. Here I stand, after all my efforts of proving the sphere failed. My ammunition against it proved to be duds, and I eventually switched teams. I had to go with my gut feeling. At the end of the day, whether the earth is flat or a sphere comes down to the question of faith. Do you trust the words of men, like we are asked to in the set paradigm? Or do we trust our five senses by using the real scientific method? If it isn't repeatable, measurable, observable, testable, and falsifiable, then it is not real science. Period. No matter what the current self-proclaimed pontificates of science say, this is how it really works. Celeste, I can tell you this straight away. I am not remotely convinced. But I am intrigued. I have a curious heart and an open mind. I did watch a couple of videos yesterday that William recommended me about it. Which ones? Very good, John. William was stoked. A video concerning a curvature test. The guy in the video tried to prove that the alleged curvature drop between 2 points in California wasn't there to be found. Jiren, I think his name was. And I watched another video that tried to debunk the good old claim of ships going over the horizon, which we were taught in school. I don't remember precisely how they tried to explain it away, but the essence of it had to do with atmospheric lensing and perspective, making the boat disappear hull first, rather than it slowly vanishing from our sight due to the curvature of the earth, as we have been told in textbooks. He called it the law of perspective. The same guy was also adamant that bridges, tunnels, and railways are not constructed with the curvature of the earth in mind. Now, I'm no architect or land surveyor, so I haven't got the foggiest if they do take the curvature in consideration or they don't. An argument I had heard before by my friend over here. John pointed at William and kept talking. Pointing out the same thing. It certainly is interesting, I will admit. All of this is, not because I share your belief, but because it has made me think about, and question, things I have literally never questioned in my entire life. William and Celeste looked at one another in unison and exchanged knowing looks. John continued. You have my attention. That said, I'm still not remotely convinced. I just can't see it. I can buy the motive, but not the logistics and paperwork that would be required to keep such a massive conspiracy going like clockwork. Not to mention that I have about 1,000 itty-gritty science questions you would need to answer and explain and go into detail of how they could possibly work on a flat, stationary Earth. I am all ears. Celeste stared right into his eyes and tapped gently on the globe with her fingers. It's a good thing that you are skeptical. In fact, the only reasonable response when first hearing about something like this is complete and utter dismissal of the idea. It's a crazy, stupid, and backward belief. A cult. A phalanx of society that belongs in the same category as the Church of Scientology, voodoo practitioners, and witch doctors. If you would have gotten aboard the train without going through this initial process, I would have been worried that there was something wrong with you. We all go through this process, which takes time. A lot of time. But when you are finally there, staring at the screen, realizing that no matter how dearly you want to cling to your beloved blue ball, we all grew up with is about as real as Santa Claus. There is a saying that was coined rather recently. A rather corny mantra, but a true one. What's the mantra? Once you go flat, you never gloat back. John chuckled. That sounds like a cheesy tagline for a B-movie. It does. But you will see how true the meaning of it is, soon enough. Celeste kept spinning the globe. I don't think you quite understand just how indoctrinated we are, every single one of us. Once boys and girls graduate from school and make the leap into adulthood, the question of where we live is something very few ever revisit. Those who bother are probably mainly the science geeks who want to learn more about the universe for the sake of personal trivia. The fact that we live on a sphere is so cemented and so programmed that it has become an unquestionable fact that we stand on a floating, wobbling, tilting blue ball of bendy water, hurling through infinite space. How did this come to be, do you think? Why is it heresy to question the shape of our world? A preponderance of evidence. Photographs from space. satellites. GPS. This is fairly basic stuff, said John calmly. Hardly. It's easy to succumb to the comforting idea that all those things are real, but I can assure you, everything you just mentioned are just different branches of the same mythical tree. No, the real reason why 99% of mankind believe what they believe is due to repetition. What is the first thing you see when you enter a classroom? Any classroom, at any given place in the world. North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, Oceania, it matters not. John made an indifferent gesture. I don't know, a whiteboard. Benches. The periodic table hanging on the wall. True enough. But I am of course referring to this little toy, she said and handed him the globe with a determined look on her face. You saw this orb the first time, when you were but a toddler, 2 or 3 years of age at the most. At this stage, the programming takes a hold of you, as the human brain is not fully developed until the age of 25, 2 decades after you encounter the first globe. The brain of an infant is so very easily hijacked, since they don't know any better. And why would they question what the adults say? They have no reason to believe that adults are lying to them, as the concept is completely foreign altogether. Nearly lost my train of thought. Yes. This thing you now hold in your hand. You will look at this toy in one form or the other, for nearly every day of your life. If you skip school one day, no doubt will you see it pop up in movies and television shows. It's an inescapable fact that the game is rigged. We all grew up with the ball, so it's very difficult for us to unthink the ball as adults. It's an arduous process. I had not ever thought of it that way, but I suppose you're right in that sense. Had we grown up with maps depicting a flat earth in every classroom, maybe we would have grown up being more confused, said John. Deliberate or not, programming is programming. And few minds are so easily corrupted as the minds of children. The most effective way of bending a person to your will is repeating the information you want out endlessly. Eventually, they will believe it. Ask any expert in this field, and they will agree, I can guarantee you. What field would that be? Never heard of someone taking a doctorate in brainwashing young children's studies. Don't get cute with me, John. She sneered, but lovingly so. Anyway, that is the primary reason. Coupled with the programming, you are also taught right from the get-go that there is no more land to be discovered on this earth. Everything has already been mapped out and measured, right down to the last puddle of mud in Tasmania. If you believe that you live on a sphere where every inch of land and sea is already discovered, well, the only logical assumption any person, young or old, with half a brain to spare, is that searching for additional lands would be a quest most futile. We are taught that there is nothing more to see, nothing more to the story, an old truth which needs to be revisited, for sure, in light of this. John looked deep into the eyes of the elegant professor and contemplated. What is going on with my life? How did I end up in circles such as these? We are taught that the belief in a flat and stationary earth is the most preposterous worldview a man can have. An archaic belief, only subscribed to by desert-wandering nomads or Neanderthals, thousands of years past. Or in more modern time, only shared by the most uneducated rabble of society, the lowest step of the pyramid. The bottom of the barrel. We were taught that the old cultures and societies were uninformed and unintelligent, and that our 5 senses cannot be trusted. The key that unlocks truth's protective layers is embracing your 5 senses and crafting your worldview from there, and cast aside the old ways of just blindly following the words of men, which all 3 of us are guilty of, I am sure. You need to take a zetetic approach to these things. That is the road to enlightenment, in my opinion. I am a rare case indeed, a rogue breed in my professional field. Had you asked 1,000 colleagues of mine, only a handful would share my views. A handful, or less, at least officially. There was a documentary released a few years back, called The Principle. The producers of the film were devout Christians who wanted to back the men of science into a corner and convince them to spill their guts on camera about the accepted cosmology we've all been taught, and ask them to provide ample proof. What the scientists let slip is truly astounding. Many of them are quite clearly closeted geocentrists, but cannot openly admit so for obvious reasons. When the film came out, every single scientist who appeared in the movie backtracked and claimed that they had been deceived. They thought they appeared in a mainstream science documentary. Maybe they were deceived, sure. But the fact remains that they revealed what they really believe, beyond all their equations and fancy titles. They are geocentrists through and through. However, when your career is at stake, one will fight tooth and nail before publicly accepting an alternative view that opposes what your field of work relies on. In my case, the heliocentric model of the universe and all that it entails. Your ego will not allow you to question the set paradigm. Seeing as we have been engineered ever since we were toddlers that the alternative is the height of stupidity and folly, it creates an appetizing scenario for those who are responsible for designing and upholding the deception. John's eyes wandered down to the blue miniature orb resting in Celeste's firm grip. And who are they? Which secret society, which group of conspirators sat down and decided to cover this truth up? Illuminati? The Bilderberg Group? Skull and Bones? I've heard both of you explain the motive now, and I understand it on a theoretical level, but there's still a lot for me to swallow. That is a difficult question to answer, John. I do not know. William does not know. I wonder if we will ever know. But if I were to venture a guess, I would say, ordinary people. Human beings like you and I, and they are upholding this for the greater good. I would imagine that the players who run the show do not gather in a dank, murky basement every night performing blood rituals, nor do they worship heathen gods. I think that it is a fairly small group of high-ranking government officials from all the major countries that have been elected to keep the lie going that started in the 50s by their forebears when NASA and the Russian space agency Roscosmos were founded. They have no choice but to see the lie through, keep expanding it to new horizons, making it bigger. When a lie has grown big and all-encompassing enough, there is no return. So they will keep churning out these faux missions to Mars in the future, because it is the logical next step for the narrative, said Celeste. I only partly agree, Celeste. William, who had stayed silent for longer than usual, felt the need to chime in. I think there is a valid case to be made that this secret is kept from us due to a sort of greater good kind of thing. Like, that the average man would not be able to handle such a large revelation. But who knows? Maybe they are lying to us purely for selfish, malicious reasons. Money, for instance. NASA receives $20 billion a year, let that sink in, John, if you will. That is about $50 million a day. Might be that the funding of NASA is a sort of government black hole budget scheme, where they publicly throw astronomical sums at NASA and then use it for something completely different. Same goes for JAXA in Japan and Roscosmos in Russia. It would be a swindle so effortless and so ingenuous. A lie that no outsider can verify, and they would just have to perform a staged fake mission now and then. William paused and drew a loud sigh. That is true, said Celeste. And one other thing. Did you know that a huge number of astronauts are Freemasons? An unproportionally large number of them are either listed in Freemasonic lodges or are tied to them in some way, most notably our second man on the moon, Buzz Aldrin. A 33rd degree Freemason out of Montclair Lodge in New Jersey. A man who is more than willing to flaunt his Masonic ring in public, even today. This is not a conspiracy theory I'm peddling here, John. This is true, look it up for yourself. The ratio is frightening when you look into how many of them are tied to Masonry and other secret societies in some way, said William. John gallivanted nervously around in circles in the study of Celeste Wood. He walked slowly towards the large window and took a quick look outside. Valhalla Vagan is a bustling mess today, as always. He turned to the right in the great oval room and inspected the enormous oak bookcase that housed hundreds of books. Above the bookcase hung a portrait of Sir Isaac Newton. Ah, a copy of the famous portrait by Godfrey Kneller. Gosh, he was a strange man. Devoted his entire life to scientific studies. Died alone and childless, and supposedly had no interest whatsoever in women, and he never found a spouse. He never married. I hope I don't face the same end as old Isaac. He stretched out his middle finger and gently exhumed some of the books from the case. He pulled out a copy of Neil deGrasse Tyson's My Favorite Universe from the stand and pondered for himself. The more I think of this, the more bizarre it gets. I'm in the office of a renowned astrophysicist, and I have heard her pontificating about how thousands of years of scientific studies are woefully inaccurate and that theories commonly accepted as truth are false. For God's sake. The sharpest minds of mankind thousands of years ago figured out how our cosmology works to a T. Hearing this is almost disrespectful. Disrespectful to our ancestors and a slight towards modern-day scientists. John gazed from left to right and skimmed through the books. Astronomy literature by Lawrence Krauss, Tyson, Michio Kaku, and the famous Carl Sagan. To even consider this hogwash, I would need more solid facts. And I want them now. Should I cast aside all I thought was true about my existence? I want more meat and fewer potatoes. John spun around from the bookcase and faced Celeste and William. Professor Wood, John began. Celeste, she said. I'm sorry, of course. Celeste. I would like, if you may, to hear something more concrete. Real, hard science instead of speculations and conspiracy theories. Evidence, in other words. What made you flip? Celeste looked at the globe in her hand and had a contemplating look in her eyes. I don't think there's any particular proof or experiment that made me flip the switch. It's a slow, grinding process that took months of research, where I was left standing and finally saw things from a whole different angle. Okay, but surely there has to be something. A waving red flag that would prompt you to think twice. Celeste looked puzzled. Probably when I understood that gyroscopes point unequivocally to the fact that we are on a stationary plane. If you know how gyroscopes work, which I do, there is no doubt at all that the Earth does not rotate, nor is it in any kind of motion. The fact that pilots and other professionals have yet to discover this could be summarized very quickly. Cognitive dissonance and a lifetime of indoctrination. Do you know how gyroscopes work, my friends? I know how they work, but it's a fairly complex mechanism that is hard to explain to a novice, like my green friend here. But all airplanes have them, John. A working gyroscope is of paramount importance to all aviation. The pilots know them as the artificial horizon, said William. Celeste waved her hands. There is no need to bore John out of his skull with an exact detailed explanation of the properties of the gyroscope. There are more concrete examples than the gyroscope when it comes to this example that should make the most skeptical think twice. While investigating the gyroscope and concluding that it proves that the Earth as we know it is most certainly at rest, I would not say that it is the primary slam dunk example when attempting to prove whether or not we have been deceived. The gimbal on the gyroscope ought to roll backwards when flying over a rotating sphere. But it doesn't, ever. We are not standing on a spinning disco ball, John, said William. John stared at William, trying to wrap his head around what it meant. I must look like something akin to a deer in headlights to them right now. What the hell is a gyroscope? Why were we not taught of this in school? Hold on a second now. John thought he could steer the conversation to more familiar, easily digestible territories. He paused for a second and remembered his trusted Samsung Galaxy phone and pulled it out his pocket and showed it to them. Speaking of aviation and aircrafts. How the hell would this work if satellites aren't real? I mean, they can't be, right, in your model. Satellites, I mean. You guys think that orbiting satellites in space is a hoax, am I correct? You are correct. We do not believe in satellites. Nor do we believe in space, said Celeste. Space may be the final frontier, but it's made in a Hollywood basement. The Red Hot Chili Peppers knew their stuff, said William. John rolled his eyes. And the answer you are searching for is called triangulation. Let me guess. You are wondering about how GPS could possibly work without satellites in space, asked Celeste. John nodded. I thought you might. Have you ever seen the enormous radio towers across this country? They are scattered everywhere, and not only in Sweden, mind you. Everywhere in the civilized world will you find these towers. The whole thing is ground-based. If you think that there is a tinfoil box with wings up there beaming signals down from space to you, well, then I have a $10 million property in Malibu to sell you. No, sir. And even without the towers, there are underwater sea cables connected between every continent in the world. I bet you didn't know that, did you? Antarctica not included, of course. Right, because that's where your little ice wall is, I know, guarded by those pesky penguins. Those ferocious beasts. Celeste was not amused by his jest, so John decided it would be prudent to tread lightly from now on and stick to the topic at hand. What about satellite TV? Direct TV, and so forth. Everyone knows that the satellite dish needs to be pointed up toward space, angled directly at the satellite up there. This cannot be denied. It's self-evident. I remember very clearly many years ago, back when my dad climbed up the roof of our summer cottage and installed the parabola antenna while I was down below and checked the television to see if it worked or not. The slightest tilt my father caused up there and the screen would black out. John smiled confidently. How will this pair of brainiacs explain this one? William removed his glasses and polished them gently with his shirt and spoke. Think carefully now, John. Try to thrust yourself back into the very memory you retold to us just now. Was the satellite dish pointed up to what we have been taught is space, or was it tilted only slightly upwards, or was it perhaps even perpendicular? John obeyed and closed his eyes. He thought back of the days with his parents at the summer cottage at Varmdo. He remembered almost everything. The golfing, walking through the forest at autumn scavenging for mushrooms, the fishing, the bathing. The angle of the parabola dish was aimed was not among those memories. I haven't got a clue, John confessed. If you had a clue, you would remember that they are in fact tilted. They are never angled directly up towards space. They are all aimed at something ground-based, most likely a nearby radio tower. Look it up yourself. Drive through any neighborhood and look at the roofs of any given villa. Thanks, but I have better things to do than going on a wild goose chase, looking for parabola antennas in unknown neighborhoods. John paused and said nothing for a moment that seemed to last forever. But why? Why would the people providing satellite TV be in on the greatest conspiracy in the history of mankind? Don't you understand how ridiculous it sounds? You still haven't got it, have you? They are not in on it. William sounded almost angry for once. They are not in on it. Very few people are. The reason why this deception is so ingenious is because of that very fact. A large percentage of those who indirectly or directly perpetrate the fraud are completely unaware of it. They are simply completely indoctrinated and under the same spell as all of us. Think of all the pilots who fly thousands of feet above ground daily, but have never even thought to question what they are actually flying over, despite being able to see for miles and miles ahead in all directions from their cockpit windows. They think they see a curve because they expect it to be there, not because there is a curve. Like we have said a million times before, John, it's all about the programming. It's the same scenario with the satellite dish engineer who installs your DirecTV. Naturally, he thinks that he is aiming the dish towards an imaginary object floating above in the thermosphere at 2000 degrees Celsius. William's barrage of words made John speechless, so he continued. You have to understand, John, that everything's split into separate departments. It's called compartmentalization. By compartmentalizing all the different subsections within NASA, the moon landings were so brilliantly faked. Some ignorant debunkers seem to slumber under the illusion that for the Apollo program to be a hoax, thousands of people would have to be in on it. Everyone at NASA, from the low-paid wrench turners, the engineers and the technicians, all the way to the top with the director himself pulling the strings of all these people. This assumption, according to us, could not be further from the truth. Creating a spellbinding, believable illusion is much easier when the foot soldiers doing the dirty work are blissfully unaware of what they are partaking in. Fair points. I was just about to ask about the moon landings. John had been on the fence for some time regarding whether the 6 moon landings between 1969 and 1972 ever took place. How could Nixon possibly have made that live phone call hundreds of thousands of miles away to the moon in '69 when my phone fails to receive a signal when strolling down the park? Why did all the video footage appear to be so artificial looking, and why did the moon rocks brought home by Apollo 11 turn out to be proven fakes? Those rocks Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins gave to the Prime Minister of the Netherlands were 100% fake, the museum that harbored the rock discovered, some 30-odd years later. They were not even rocks. Petrified wood. And all the telemetry data, they destroyed all of it. They willfully erased the telemetry data of the very first time a human being walked on a celestial body, the greatest achievement of mankind. Because of magnetic tape shortage. Something is rotten in the state of Denmark, unless there's moon trees growing there they haven't told us about. John eyed the toy globe and Celeste's lap once again. And the Van Allen belt. Don't forget the Van Allen belt. How the hell did every single astronaut emerge unscathed from passing through the deadly radiation belt that surrounds the Earth? Thanks to magic, most like. Or like Apollo astronaut Alan Bean said when they interrogated him about this on television. The Van Allen belt just wasn't discovered at the time, so I guess that makes all the sense in the world. Just about as much sense as placing a bet on Newcastle United to win this season of the Premier League would. There is no way they went. I want to believe, but I can't. At the very least, the footage is fake. That said, even if the moon landings were staged, leaping from that to the flat Earth is a bridge too far for me. Do they even believe that the moon is a sphere? Do they think it's just a projection of some sort? I think I saw their map once, flashing by, but I never bothered spending the time to study something so pointless. Could you show me the map, Celeste? The map of the world, according to you lot. I might have seen something flash by once on the internet, but a more thorough breakdown would be nice. When I saw it, I thought you flat earthers viewed the world as a floating disk in space, but from what I have learned this is not the case, right? There is no current working flat earth model. 4 years have passed, and no one has yet produced a map that works, right down to the last inch. There is the square map, the diamond map, and the azimuthal, equidistant map, which is without a doubt the best representation of the real world out there. It has its flaws, like all maps. The scaling is off the mark, and some other minor issues I will get into later. But for all its flaws, it is more accurate than the globe, which is the important part here. We can't claim to know exactly how the world looks like from above, John, and for a damn good reason. This is the greatest deception ever known to man, and we do not possess the same kind of resources and manpower as the governments of the world do. It would take decades, centuries even, to map the world. How can we trust that the distance from, say, continent to continent is accurate? They construed this world, and if they lied about the very shape of it, they might very well have lied about the finer details of it too. We don't have a working model yet, but we don't need one to know that we are not standing on an oblate pear, hurling through infinite space. Wipe the slate clean, John. Unlearn what you have learned. Celeste took a seat by the desk, opened her handbag, and pulled up a Dell laptop on the table, and pressed the start button. Care for an M&M? Celeste pushed the glass bowl, filled to the brim with multicolored candy, to John and William as the Windows logo popped up on her computer. William grabbed a handful of candies and leaned over Celeste's shoulder as she punched in the Windows password. John followed suit and leaned over behind as she started up Mozilla Firefox, went to Google, and searched for azimuthal, equidistant map, and an intriguing picture came up. Hundreds of pages on the Google Images section showed up. The maps varied in size, color, design, and even had different names, but they all were just different interpretations of the same basic map. We call it the AE map, John. Much easier to pronounce in a rapid-fire kind of way, rather than trying to say azimuthal, equidistant over and over. It doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, does it? It's called the Gleason map, or the Hammond map by some, but I'll always think of it as the AE map. The projection depicted the world as seen from above as a circle, with the North Pole in the middle, and the continent of Antarctica surrounding the world from all sides, creating a 360-degree ring of ice. So, this is their beleaguered ice wall. William gently tapped his shoulder. The moment you first lay your eyes on this picture, something strikes a chord, doesn't it? I mean, sure, a million questions remain unanswered in your head, but it isn't as easy to just blindly dismiss this map, as you realize that it is far from as ridiculous as the one in your mind's eye prior to seeing this, how you envisage the flat earth. You most likely pictured yourself a two-dimensional flying square, with water spilling out at all sides, when flat earth as a real concept was first flung your way. This map is, like Celeste pointed out before, flawed. Flawed would be an understatement, in fact. But it serves a purpose in the sense that you gain an instant understanding for how flights and circumnavigation would work, and of course, the realization that there might not be a need for any hypothetical edge, as it were. When you see this image, you start toying with the idea for real. Hold your horses, now. You say that circumnavigation would work if this map matches reality. If that really was the case, then that means that mariners and pilots are constantly adjusting their course, steering them to complete a full circle, if that is how circumnavigation really works. The thing is that millions of people have already circumnavigated the Earth from east to west. Let's say that you take off on a plane at the equator, in, northern Brazil. John slid his finger down the globe and placed it on the city of Manaus in Amazonia, Brazil. We decide to fly due east, in a straight line. Are you telling me that we are not going to end up where we started eventually? We will hit the Antarctic shoreline. Exactly. Celeste zoomed in on the AE map. The fact is that if you fly in any constant direction, you will hit Antarctica. Any direction. But how? As you may know, we believe that the North Pole is the magnetic center of the world. All compasses adjust to true north, and true north being the direction pointed towards the North Pole. Everything we see above in the sky revolves around it, and directly above rests the pole star, Polaris. Mainstream science places this star at a distance of approximately 433 light-years away. We believe it is just a couple of thousand miles up. It makes sense, so much sense. The Earth is all there is, John. Outer space does not exist. But your question was about navigation, not what is going on in the night sky, so let me get back to that. Celeste went to YouTube and used the search engine. Ah, that's the one. The video she clicked on depicted a man moving a magnet around on an azimuthal, equidistant projection, trying to visually show his audience how it could work. It is true that the sailor and the pilot need to adjust their course if they are to complete a circumnavigation of the world. But the adjustment is so slight that they would barely be able to tell. You probably think that they would have to constantly steer their craft one way or the other, lest they end up somewhere completely off course. They would not. Like I said, the compass will always point towards true north, so as the vessel travels in a straight line, the compass will adjust to what is north from where you are. The magnetic field of the Earth just makes far more sense on a stationary plane versus a spinning globe. If you fly east of Amazonia, the needle in the compass will swing from its initial position, and you will have to follow that heading if you want to end up where you intended to. However, if you were to ignore the compass and just travel in a straight line if you are so able, you will eventually wind up in the south and run into Antarctica after a long arduous voyage, no doubt. Same goes for traveling west, naturally. It's a bit tricky to visualize in your head without the AE map, is it not? A bit, but I think I get it now. Also, William chimed in from behind. Have you ever thought of the fact that an aircraft flying over a sphere would have to constantly dip their nose downwards to adjust for the curvature drop of the Earth? Sure, the Earth is massive in size and mass, but it is not that huge. There would absolutely be a remarkable curvature drop downwards if you were to fly a jet at a level altitude. If not, you would just eventually fly out to what we were told is outer space, although airplanes cap out at an altitude way below the Kármán line, of course, but we're just talking metaphysical theories here, so bear with me. It would have to dip its nose downwards after, at the very least, an hour or two. The Globers say the reason why pilots don't have to adjust for curvature is because the magic of gravity keeps the airplane at a level altitude, which is just absolute unproven hogwash. That is correct, William. John, if you were to hop on a plane from Stockholm down to Sydney, Australia, do you really think that the aircraft would reach its destination without course correction? You are literally flying from one pole to the other, well, almost, anyway. The curvature drop between Stockholm and Sydney is just gargantuan in terms of numbers. How do you know that the pilots don't compensate for curvature? It's widely known that they don't. Pilots use a so-called artificial horizon, a tool specifically designed to help the pilots fly at a level altitude. The artificial horizon is a gyroscope of sorts, and it is tailor-made for flight over a non-rotating flat surface. I asked the pilot myself when I flew to Gothenburg 6 months ago, and he confirmed everything I just said. What brought you to Gothenburg, Celeste? Said William curiously. I went there along with 2 other colleagues, Dr. Gunnell and Dr. Stearman, to guest speak at a science conference. The only memorable part of Gothenburg was being persuaded into trying mackerel for lunch. Woeful. Yes, Gothenburg is a cesspool, but that is not important right now. John was eager to continue with the discussion and had no desire of wasting time with unrelated distractions. I have an actual astrophysicist here, right in front of me. That does not happen often. Time to fire on all my cylinders and see how they deal with it. I could buy circumnavigation working. But how would the sun and the moon work on a plane? Why do we have time zones? If the sun is small and circles over the Earth, why would it ever set? I mean, the sun is clearly falling away from us due to the rotation of the Earth, and when it is setting it is blocked by the curvature of the Earth. Even if the sun is traveling away from you, it would still be visible, and at no point would there be night. Hang on a minute, you knew that the archaic globe proof of ships going over the horizon is a question of perspective, so how could you not have made the similar connection with something so basic as time zones and sunrise and sunsets? I haven't had the time to dissect a theory that has been dead and buried for millennia, only now exhumed by stoners and free thinkers like yourself. John breathed heavily. Okay. So how does it work? Celeste opened a new YouTube video that depicted a computer simulation of the celestial bodies over a flat Earth. Your first mistake is making the assumption that the sun is a gargantuan nuclear star, so massive in size that it is simply incomprehensible for the human mind to process. 1,000,000 times the size of Earth and 93 million miles away, which is what they teach our children in school. In reality, the sun is something else entirely, judging by its properties, and it is much smaller and closer. We cannot claim to know exactly what the sun is or how it works down to a T, but what can be told just from observation alone is that it could not possibly be a flaming ball of fire and plasma as mainstream science claims it is. The heat it radiates is most certainly electromagnetic in nature. Just think about it, we are meant to believe that the huge fluctuations in temperature during the day is caused by our planet being slightly further away from an object 93 million miles away, that a slight axial tilt is the difference between an area being engulfed in smoldering heat and the other area adjacent to frozen tundra. Preposterous. It makes so much more sense if the sun is local and its rays are the most potent when the sun is at its zenith. There is enough proof in my mind to claim that the entire universe, as we know it, is electrical rather than gravitational. Something that proponents for the electric universe theory, like Wallace Thornhill's Thunderbolts project, long have postulated. Even though those people do not subscribe to the flat earth theory, she said. John looked outside the window and gazed up to the blue sky. So many theories out there, he said wistfully. There are indeed. So many different, alternative theories to the commonly accepted heliocentric model of the universe. They all have varying models and explanations, but it stems from the same uncomfortable well of truth. That the accepted model is so easy to poke holes in, as all houses built upon lies tend to be. The truth will out, one way or the other. You were going to tell me how the sun moves over the earth. Oh yes. Where was I? Yes, the sun's motion. The ancients knew that the sun and the moon circled above the earth in a clockwise spiral pattern, shedding light and warmth over half the world at once, like a spotlight. Imagine, if you can, a large clock in a darkened room. You point your flashlight and move it clockwise, lighting up the world in a circular path. The night portion of the earth is simply the area where the spotlight we know as the sun is not presently cruising over. But why would the sun set? Even if the sun is much smaller in diameter and angular resolution, it would still never truly vanish, right? No, John. Pay attention. William was frantic. Easy, William. He's hardly the first person who is unaware of how perspective and our eyesight works. Celeste opened a new tab on Firefox, wrote something on the keyboard, and turned over to John. Take a look at this picture. As you can see, the parallel lines converge at the vanishing point in this image. Now, picture the same concept, only with our sun. The sun rises and sets due to what you have familiarized yourself with already, perspective. When the sun sets from our point of view, it is not setting due to our earth falling away from the sun until our half of the ball is on the dark side of earth, the non-illuminated half of the globe. The sun vanishes from our eyes because at a certain point, the sun is just simply too far away from us to see. Our eyes have very limited field of vision, and when it is cruised very far away, you no longer see it. This piece of information is crucial, John. It is also the reason as to why we cannot see landmasses infinitely far away, as if you would try to see the coast of Portugal from the east coast of the United States. Nor would you be able to lay your eyes on Mount Everest from Sweden, no matter how strong your telescope or high-powered zoom camera may be. While optics can see a lot further than our eyes, there is still too much moisture in the air, blocking the view in the case of such extreme distances. Atmospheric distortion, refraction, haze, mist, and so on. This is becoming rather eerie. Her explanations are logical, sensible. It's terrifying to realize that I knew so very little about the most basic of things. And I always considered myself educated. Could my conviction on some matters truly be misguided? Maybe I am just regurgitating schoolbook nonsense. Because we never really learned any of this in school. Maybe we are in a matrix after all, a prison for the mind. No. Don't let them off the hook so quickly. I'll fire the whole round before caving into this. I have to concede that your explanation of this was not nearly as cringe-worthy as I had expected. So, the sun and the moon travel in perfect circles over the earth, forming a yin and yang sort of symbiosis. Not quite. The sun and the moon move in an elliptical path over the earth, clockwise. Their speed varies. The sun is much faster. The sun circles widen exponentially as it travels toward the southern hemisphere, which is the cause of the seasons. And yes, I am aware of the irony of me calling the south a hemisphere, but I will do that since hemisplane as a word is not yet commonly used, so bear with me for simplicity's sake. Anyway, where were we? Yes, the seasons. The sun spirals between the two tropics, making wider and wider circles until it reaches the very south, at which point it starts spiraling back towards the north, in narrower circles until it reaches the North Pole again, rinse and repeat. During the winter solstice in Sweden, the sun is positioned above the Tropic of Capricorn way down south, and when summer is upon us the sun is positioned almost right above us in the Tropic of Cancer. Pretty self-explanatory once you grasp the mechanics of the system we live in. When the sun is situated directly over the North Pole, they have sunlight over there 24/7 over a span of a few days. Are the other celestial bodies spherical or flat? The moon, the sun, and stars? Is the moon a rock as we have been taught? The question was directed at Celeste, but it was William who answered. Who knows, he said. Well, someone, or somebody, does know of course. A select few would know the exact layout of the correct world map and what the planets and the stars are. As for the moon, there is no real consensus in the community, but most dispute the notion that it is a ball of rock. There have been numerous confirmed sightings where people have been able to spot clouds through the moon, lending further credence that the moon could not possibly be a physical, massive space rock. It just might be translucent. These reported sightings are numerous, and people have seen stars through the moon with optics, and at times even with the naked eye. Also, the light emanating from the moon suggests that it could be concave or completely flat. How so? Because the moon shines so bright that it lights up the night sky. If you shine a light on a spherical object, such as a cue ball, it reflects the light nothing like the moon does. The light propagated through the moon simply cannot be reproduced in a physical experiment here on Earth, hence the skepticism. Next time you look at the night sky with your gaze fixed on the full moon, you will understand what I'm saying. Interesting. The moon always puzzled me, irked me in some ethereal way. It just seemed odd that we would always see the same side of it, no matter what. Most of us believe that we live under a dome, with the stars and the planets revolving over the Earth with the North Star, Polaris, being the axis mundi, but you know that already now. The planets are just like the stars, unidentified circular lights in the sky. The ancients, such as the Mayans, referred to what we now call planets as wandering stars. Unlike what we have been told, the folk of yore were not clueless and ignorant. They could see that the so-called wandering stars behaved differently than the regular stars, following their own path instead of endlessly traveling in circles over the plane. The ancients had excellent tools at their disposal that helped them decipher the heavens above, such as the first ever analog computer dating back to 100 BC. The Antikythera mechanism, it was called, and the device was designed with a flat, stationary Earth in mind, as was the astrolabe. By the way, did you know that the closest star is 4.3 light-years away in the commonly accepted model, the one we've been taught? 4.3 light-years away, and a 100-year-old man with cataracts can still see this object with his naked eye. It's ridiculous, said William. Yes, the alleged distances to the stars range from ludicrous at best and unfathomable at worst, said Celeste. They tell us that the reason as to why we can see Polaris every night from 434 light-years away is because it is so behemothian in size that it dwarfs our own sun in size by times 50. Even if Polaris was 1,000,000 times the size of our sun, we should not be able to see something that far away because it breaks the inverse square law by a landslide. If you do the math on the distances to the stars and how far we should be able to see, every single star in the heliocentric model violates the inverse square law. And the fact that there has been no change in parallax for all these thousands of years, science will tell you that there has been multiple North Stars, but there is absolutely no way of proving that. They claim that in 3000 BC, the North Star was not Polaris, but a star called Alpha Draconis. It is also claimed that in 13,000 years from now, our North Star Polaris will be replaced by a star called Vega. Is there any way of proving of this, do you think? No. This calculation is a mathematical construct, just like the other branches of the woefully inaccurate heliocentric system that I was taught my whole life and taught to others along the way. What do you think the odds are for the fact that Earth just happened to end up in this perfect sweet spot, this so-called Goldilocks zone? What do you think the chances are that a cosmic explosion of nothingness created this perfect planet? What do you think the mathematical probabilities are that our moon and sun are near identical in angular size from our vantage point here on Earth as a result from a random accident in the cosmos billions of years ago? This place is special and designed by intelligent touch. We do not live on a random space rock, chasing a fireball in the sky, nor are there more stars than all the grains of sand on Earth. John pondered. I have never even thought of questioning the distance to the stars, only that they are obviously supposed to be very far away. Neither did I, for most of my life. Despite my profession, I never once looked up into the night sky and asked myself if those numbers are real. There are just so many observations that we have here on Earth that do not comply with the heliocentric model. Another thing is those rare occasions when the selenelian occurs, she said. Selenelian? What's that? A selenelian is something that occurs exclusively during a lunar eclipse. When the eclipsed moon and the sun are visible at the same time, that's a selenelian. Since the moon is supposed to be reflecting the sunlight unlike what we believe, which is that the moon is its own light source, it is an utter impossibility for this to occur in the globe model. The excuse they give for it is that the selenelian is an atmospheric mirage, the usual getaway when the scientific community stands clueless. A mirage, or a convenient case of refraction. Sometimes they merge the two excuses together, which just makes it even easier to pick apart for someone with half a brain to spare. I don't know about the selenelian, but it is glaringly obvious that we can see way too far if we lived on a ball. The long-range sightings that can be seen almost daily, like seeing the Toronto skyline over Lake Michigan from Detroit. How plausible is it that a mirage would occur over the water every single day there? It's not a mirage, John. They see the city over the water because the city is right there. There's no mumbo-jumbo miraging, or illusion, or other magical tricks being pulled on us. The city is visible because we live on a plane, and even though the math says that Toronto should be hidden behind miles of curvature, it is not, said William in a brazen tone of voice. Yeah, but I've already heard this argument. You've already told me that there is no curvature and that we apparently see too far. Let her finish about the celestial bodies now. That's what I am interested to hear more about. John turned to Celeste. Please continue. Tycho Brahe, the esteemed Danish astronomer, wholeheartedly rejected the Copernican paradigm, which at the time reigned supreme. Brahe pointed out that in order for the Copernican model of the universe to work, the stars would by necessity have to be so large that it defied all common sense and reason. He refused to embrace the Copernican model. But there was another in his Prague abode who was more than willing to take the reins from the late Copernicus and step up as the next rising star in the field. Who? Asked John. His apprentice, Johannes Kepler. Brahe died suddenly and mysteriously in the autumn of 1601, and before his corpse had gone cold, Kepler threw out everything his old master had taught him out the window and started preaching the Copernican heliocentric model, the one we still live by. It has been accepted as absolute truth now for several hundreds of years, but it has never been proven. Scientists, now and then, always were accursed with a large dose of hubris. Did you know that the first globe Earth model was made in the year of 1492 by the German astronomer Martin Behaim? 1492, 500 years is nothing. When you realize this and take an unbiased look at the timeline, you will quickly realize that it is the globe that happens to be the new kid on the block, not the other way around. Even the great Alexander von Humboldt rejected the Copernican principle as late as the 19th century. The room grew silent as the three looked at one another, as if each person was expecting someone other than themselves to continue. It was John who broke the deadlock. He walked slowly from the window back to the desk and looked once again at the globe in Celeste's lap. If there are no satellites up there, what kind of craft took all the thousands of pictures of planet Earth? William burst into laughter. Pictures. Pictures. If there existed actual pictures of the ball Earth, John, do you for a second believe that this movement would have the legs that it has? There are no pictures of the Earth. There are no pictures of other planets, or stars, asteroids, and the other lot for that matter. Every single one of them admitted composites, computer-generated images, or straight-up drawings. Illustrations. There is only one picture they claim is real, and that is the blue marble shot from 1972, and they've milked that for nearly 50 years. Not that I think that picture is real either, but I will admit that it looks better than the CGI pictures they are putting out today. John scoffed. What you just said is horse manure. I don't believe a word of that. CGI. That wasn't even invented back in the day of the Apollo missions. There was no Photoshop or computer trickery. Stop wasting my time and present some real arguments for your case. Celeste gave John a wry look. You want me to show you pictures of the Earth? Yes. There has got to be tens of thousands of pictures at this stage, taken by not only the astronauts in the International Space Station, but by space rockets, probes, and satellites. There has to be, there needs to be. As you wish, she said. As Celeste started typing on the keyboard, John walked over to her side of the desk and leaned forward over her shoulder to the laptop. She searched for pictures of Earth from space on Google Images and pressed enter, and a myriad of colorful orbs showed up. Jesus Christ. Scroll down a bit so I can see the real pictures of the Earth. Celeste did not scroll down, nor did she say a word. Wait. These are supposed to be real. They passed them off as real. That can't be. This is what you have, John. This is your beloved globe. This is not happening. These cannot be the only pictures. These are ridiculous. All the colors vary from globe to globe. And the continents are all skewed. Some of these are identical with just the contrast changed. Celeste kept scrolling. Should I keep going? You won't find anything more realistic deeper down this rabbit hole, believe me. The globe is about as real as the Loch Ness Monster, about as factual as Santa Claus, said William. Not a bad analogy, William. The difference is that adults no longer believe in Santa Claus once they reach a certain age. They learn how to let go of fairy tales. But they will cling on to this fantasy, which is very near and dear to them. It will take many years or a whole lifetime for people to wake up because they love their precious ball far too much. Like they say in the Truman Show. People accept the reality of which they are presented, quoted William. Celeste nodded. Is this a farce? Are these truly what they say are real actual pictures of the world? Every single one of them look as phony as a $7 bill, said John, and pointed at an image in the upper left side corner. Click on that one and enlarge it, please. Celeste obliged. Here is the iconic big blue marble from 2012, said Celeste and clicked on the link, which directed her browser to the NASA web page. This picture is rather hysterical actually. Not only is it obviously fraudulent and computer animated, but the animators at NASA really phoned it in when they created this piece of hot garbage. They phoned it in worse than Bruce Willis in a direct-to-DVD action flick. Take a look at the clouds in the bottom left corner. They are cloned and stamped together. And in the right-hand corner, east of North America, you can clearly see that the clouds form the word sex. Like their designer admits to the public. The pictures of Earth are photoshopped because they have to be, said William. Why would NASA admit that their pictures are fake? Who said that? Some intern. His name is Robert Simon, also known as Mr. Blue Marble. He goes vividly into detail on how he created this artificial globe in Photoshop. Alright. Could you back up and compare this globe to another NASA picture? Celeste pressed backstage and zeroed in on a new picture from the NASA website. John was in disbelief. North America covers half of the planet compared to the other picture. Which kind of kindergarten do they handpick their computer animators from? William laughed. I don't know, John. But I am glad we can agree that these pictures are 100% counterfeit. Now, NASA faking pictures does not at all automatically mean that the ball Earth is a hoax that would be rushing to conclusions. But it's another piece of the puzzle, another brick in the wall of the undeniable preponderance of evidence. If this picture is real, then the United States, Canada, and Mexico would cover one half of the globe, leaving no room for the other continents. I suppose the United States landmass, much like its population, gained a few pounds in between the years these two pictures were released. John chuckled. I have a thought experiment for you now, young man, said Celeste and placed a firm grip on the orb, depicting the known world with her right hand. Look at this globe, she said and spun it around. As you knew well before this conversation, the Earth is covered by mostly water. 70%, in fact. My question is, have you ever seen large quantities of water bend around the exterior of an object? Bendy water. What? Wait, like the oceans being wrapped around the globe? No. I never thought about that. Raindrops curve though. Don't they? But they are hardly comparable to the ocean. If I'd bring up raindrops they'd just call it an ad hoc. No, I don't think so. Exactly, and you never will. Because the nature of water is to always find and maintain its own level, a law that goes out the window if the ball is true. It's a physical necessity for the globe that the world's oceans are all bent slightly, thanks to our magical friend called gravity. And have you ever heard of a repeatable experiment when you have a sphere spinning 1,000 miles an hour with liquid stuck to it? If you can find me an example in nature or in a science lab when a sphere is shown to possess these properties that makes liquid weighing billions of tons sticking perfectly to the ball. I guess there aren't many. There are none. Because it cannot be demonstrated and it never will be. Like all fictional fantasies are. Water will always find its own level. Whether the liquid rests in a bathtub, lake or world ocean, you can bet that fancy coat you have there that the water lays completely flat and level. So, what's the official explanation for this anomaly in the heliocentric model? That the force of gravity bends the water around the Earth with surgical precision, with such a minuscule slope that it cannot be detected from ground level. As you know, science tells you that gravity pulls everything towards the center of the Earth, so no matter where you stand on the globe, you are on top of the ball, and everything curves away from you downwards from there. As for how the water is bent around the ball, they describe this as curve level, which has got to be the mother of all oxymorons, if I ever heard one. Something is either level, or it is curved. They want to have the cake, and eat it too, she exclaimed. It is freakishly scary how much sense this is starting to make. That the water simply rests at level everywhere on the Earth, instead of being stuck to a spinning ball that also orbits the sun in millions of miles a day. My foundations are beginning to crack. Although the pillars the house rests on are yet to crumble completely. There are still so many questions left unanswered. Speaking of the big G, gravity. How would it work on a plane? William cringed. Do you remember how I explained to you that Nikola Tesla was adamantly convinced that Albert Einstein's theory of relativity was a farce? Yes. Naturally, the theory of gravity goes out the window if the Earth is truly flat. Gravity dictates that all mass is pulled to the center of the Earth, but if the Earth is flat with the North Pole being in the center, well, it would not work at all, and no flat earther believes that the force of gravity exists. Mathematically, the force of gravity, when applied to the sphere, works. That's all fine and dandy on paper, but it has never been proven. We believe that the force, which makes objects rise and fall in the air, comes down to density and buoyancy. Do you understand the concept? Not quite. Give me an example. Why would density and buoyancy replace the force of gravity, which is unanimously agreed upon to exist? There's no debate about this in the scientific community. Gravity is a law, not a theory. For many years this has been so. Of course, I know that the force of gravity is not up for debate in the scientific community. Most scientists are too far gone. Have you ever been bewildered by how selective gravity is? It is strong enough to keep millions of gallons of water stuck to the surface, and it keeps massive buildings pinned down, but weak enough to let butterflies and birds fly freely. The force of gravity is pseudoscience, since it cannot be demonstrated in any way. It truly is the duct tape of science. If I am to believe that gravity can keep water sticking to the side of a ball that spins and travels in an elliptical path around the sun at millions of miles an hour, I want to see some damn good proof of that. And while they are at it, they should be able to present proof of how the Earth's velocity somehow manages to escape the centrifugal and the centripetal force. The Earth is not speeding around the sun in a constant velocity, you know. It slows down and accelerates as it revolves around the sun on the ecliptic plane in the heliocentric model. Again, how does density and buoyancy work then? It's very simple. The reason why something dense, like a rock, will fall to the ground when dropped is because the item in question is denser than the air surrounding it. But if you fill a balloon with helium, it will rise upwards, thanks to buoyancy. The helium in the balloon is less dense than the air, therefore it rises up. I have to say, I have wondered at times about gravity. It seems like it is the scapegoat for everything that scientists cannot explain. Quite so, said William. Every single conundrum that science is faced with, dark matter, black holes, the bending of space-time, and other metaphysical hodgepodge, they always pull the gravity card out of their ass to fix everything that does not work. The only experiment ever claimed to have proven the force of gravity is the Cavendish experiment from the late 18th century, when Henry Cavendish from the Royal Institution in London made a woeful attempt at proving the force of gravity by hanging a few lead balls in his backyard shed. He spun them around for a few minutes and then declared to the world that he had found proof that mass attracts mass. This experiment, by today's standards, is of course easily dismissed. It cannot be reproduced, but the proponents of the doctrine of the sphere will still tout it as a pillar of their belief. The doctrine of the sphere? Your name-calling of the average person's belief is getting saltier by the minute. I thought it was rather clever a name myself, said William and smirked. Anyway, multiple experiments debunked the force of gravity and the alleged motion of the Earth. The Michelson-Morley experiment, the Michelson-Gale experiment, the Soniac experiment, and the test that went on to be called Airy's failure all failed to prove the assumed notion that the Earth was in motion. Every single one of these experiments proved this, even though they did not draw such conclusions at the time, and they were all performed for different reasons. The Michelson-Morley experiment was not performed to test if the motion of the Earth could be detected, but to find out if the luminiferous ether, which scientists of that day believed, existed. It did not, and so Einstein came onto the stage and simply eliminated the ether a couple of years later, but that is another fiver. What's the luminiferous ether? Asked John. It was something of a consensus in the scientific community in the late 1800s that the propagation of light was explained by a medium they referred to as the ether, like William just said, Celeste explained. Albert Michelson and Edward Morley performed their experiment and found to their surprise that there was not a trace of evidence that the ether even existed. What they did not realize is that they also proved that the Earth is not in motion. While they did not latch on to this discovery at the time, we certainly have now. I wager you were never taught of these experiments in school. Am I close to the mark? Am I in the vicinity nearby, or even closer? I wager it's much more likely that you were taught of the Foucault's pendulum and how that device somehow proved that the Earth is in constant motion. Even if it is true that Leon Foucault claimed to have picked up a 15-degree drift during his heyday, any such detected motion could be chalked up as something else. Like the ether. The Foucault pendulum also malfunctions during eclipses, which the scientific community currently are at a loss for an explanation for. It's called the Alice effect. Am I close? John thought long and hard until he spoke. I think you might be. Now, high school was 10 or 15 years ago for me, but I don't remember us being presented with any sort of evidence in favor of or against the sphere. As far as I remember, the curriculum was pretty much this. You're on a giant ball, and Columbus proved it when he crossed the Atlantic and went ashore on the North American continent. And beneath us there are different layers of the Earth, with a molten core at its center. We were never taught to my knowledge that there was still debate going on as recent as just 100 or 200 years ago, whether we live on a plane or a planet. William nodded. The molten core allegedly consisting of iron and nickel. Funny how in the real world, those metals lose their magnetic properties when melted. But in the case of the Earth, these melted metals somehow produce Earth's magnetic field. Once again, it's a story. Theoretical unfalsifiable pseudoscience. We read it in textbooks and accepted it as gospel. Along with the rest of the carefully engineered government narrative. And then we regurgitate it in school tests and pass it along to the next generation. My brain is starting to overheat. I don't even know what to say right now. We have all literally spent years reading the same old textbooks, and once repeated enough times, it becomes unquestionable truth. Even now, as I have woken up from my slumber, I still catch myself thinking in heliocentric terms. I remind myself to trust my own senses, first and foremost. Oh, and John, since we talked about the alleged motion of the Earth. The proofs we are presented with currently is absolute nonsense, like the Coriolis effect. Neil deGrasse Tyson claims that snipers and football players are forced to adjust for the motion of the Earth when they fire a bullet or kick the ball, which is patently absurd. Ask any sniper or athlete. Do you think they adjust for some imaginary force when they throw or kick a ball? Spoiler alert. They do not. Do you know which famed scholar once went on record saying, "Oh God, it's one of your quotes again"? Yeah. Guilty as charged. The quote is as follows. Yes. I have come to believe that the motion of the Earth cannot be detected by any experiment. Mike Tyson just after he got knocked out real hard or after his 9th brandy at the same boxing after party. Close, but no cigar. Albert Einstein said this at a conference in Kyoto, Japan. 1922 was the year, I believe. Mind you, I am not making this up. The poster boy of modern science, sculptor of the theory of relativity, and chosen by Time magazine as the man of the century, said this point blank. No wonder Tesla rejected his theories, the guy just didn't have a clue what he was talking about. Nikola Tesla was the real deal, the true genius. And it's only now after many decades when he is starting to get the posthumous credit he deserves. He was a man before his time in every sense of the word, discarded as a madman by those too limited to recognize his vision for the future. John was baffled. Is that real? He really said that? Are you sure this quote isn't just something you read on the internet that an overexcited flat earther cherry-picked? More than once have I gotten outfoxed by savvy liars on the internet. Just saying. William did not flinch. He really said so. That's crazy. John wandered around and nervously fingered the astrophysics books he went to look at just before. He walked off to the window and looked up the sky, which had blackened considerably before his eyes. Gosh, the sun sets quickly this time of year. Or have we been in this study for multiple hours? I can't even tell any longer. As John gazed up the starry skies, a blinking object flashed up above. A pale red and green light faded in and out. An airplane. He spun around and addressed them both. Where do all the rockets go? The ones launched by NASA, SpaceX, and the rest. If this is true? Celeste smiled. Where do they go indeed? Let's just say that the only thing NASA ever sent to space is your imagination. What do you mean? That you should pay attention next time you view footage of a rocket launch, whether it is from NASA, Roscosmos, JAXA, SpaceX, or any other space agency. If you look closely, when the rocket is airbound, you will notice that its trajectory is not vertical, as you would expect. The rockets always arc in a parabolic curve. The rocket dips slowly until its course is completely horizontal and poof. Out of sight. Where indeed. Davy Jones' locker would be my best guess. I know this is very hard to absorb, but those rockets do not reach outer space. They make sure that the rockets are launched out of sight, at which point they simply land the craft somewhere far away from prying eyes in the Atlantic Ocean, next to Cape Canaveral. Every NASA launch the past 60 years follows this same pattern. If you don't believe me, watch the videos yourself. You're telling me that every rocket, satellite, and probe ever launched have been purposely crashed in the ocean. All part of a grand plan, a generation-spanning deliberate ruse? That is exactly what I am saying. The Atlantic Ocean is NASA's very own dumpster. A cemetery, a graveyard for 60 years, reserved for their fake rockets, she said. John was numb at this point. That's an insane theory, he exclaimed without conviction in his voice. I should be upset by this onslaught of incessant lunacy. But can I really dismiss this without looking into it further? I can't. I'll do my research. Celeste walked up to him gently and gave him a pat on the shoulder. It is insane, for sure. But once in a blue moon, there is that one rare occasion when the truth leads you places that at first sight looks like the craziest thing you have ever seen. We were all deceived, all of us. Once you start going down this rabbit hole, there is no way out. You will be inclined to go deeper down the cavern, wherever it takes you. And where will it take me, said John. You will have to come to that conclusion yourself. Will you walk the paved road of comforting lies, or will you dare treading down those windy steps into the dark alley that leads to an uncomfortable truth? When you go home, I would like you to look into the shenanigans going on at the International Space Station, the ISS. Ask yourself this. Are those videos recorded from a craft in space orbiting at 17,000 miles an hour? Or is it perhaps much more likely that they are shot somewhere safely on ground, here on Earth? That craft has been up there for nearly 2 decades now. It never gets hit by any micrometeorite, it never malfunctions, and all the astronauts come and go as they please. They seem to have a bowl up there. If they are up there, look at the spacewalks and you will see bubbles floating upwards regularly. Bubbles? John asked. What bubbles? Like water bubbles? Yes. They are clearly shot underwater, in an underwater tank. NASA runs a facility called the Neutral Buoyancy Lab, where they prepare the actors for space by having them swim around underwater, with scuba divers aiding them. Did I say actors? I meant to say astronauts. Freudian slip, she said. William nodded. It's not exactly too far-fetched to suggest that those spacewalks are in fact filmed right there, where the alleged astronaut training takes place. Filming underwater is a neat way to simulate the weightlessness they need to sell the public when they put out their fake spacewalk videos. Like she said, you can see water bubbles in every single one of these spacewalks. I'm sure the naysayers will say that those bubbly things are just ice particles or space debris. Yeah, right. If it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, then it probably is a duck. Those are water bubbles, no question about it. Well, the spacewalks are filmed with submerged actors in a pool. I don't doubt that they use every trick in the book to fool us. That's what I would do if I would orchestrate a deception on this scale. Keep the methods versatile, lest prying eyes stay locked in a state of confusion, said Celeste. The powers that be, who govern these space agencies, are most likely 10 or 20 years ahead of the rest of society when it comes to technology. Historically, it has always been the military and the government having first dibs on the latest tech. It is no stretch at all to suggest that the tech they use for fakery is many years ahead of what is known to the public. Unbeknownst even to the sharpest minds in the technology field, not just the average Joe, said William. I agree. Most of their trickery is rather old school though. The International Space Station interior is a good old-fashioned studio, with the astronauts trapped onto wires and harnesses so that they can perform somersaults and jump around on demand in a reasonably convincing manner. For the extended sequences, they most likely use a so-called vomit comet, which is a parabolic flight used for that exact purpose, achieving weightlessness for a couple of minutes due to its rapid descent. The vomit comet's been around for many decades too, said Celeste. But the ISS has a 24/7 camera on it filming Earth. I know that because I watched it myself a couple of years back. Are those videos just computer generated? Asked John. They might be. But it's more plausible that they are simply flying a craft mocked up to look like the ISS, like a spy plane, at a high altitude with a fisheye lens camera strapped onto it. As you can clearly tell from the footage, NASA uses GoPro cameras on the ISS. The cameras are pointed straight downwards as the craft flies at 17,000 miles an hour, providing the public a visual of our blue and cloudy home. What the hell is a fisheye lens? Camera lens is shaped like an eye of an aquatic creature. The proponents of a fisheye lens are to distort the video into making everything look curved. If you strap a camera on a high-altitude balloon and send it straight up, Earth will appear to curve like a ball from a mere 100 feet up in the sky. Why? Because the fisheye lens will bend everything: rivers, lakes, houses, mountains, Earth. They will all show curvature that isn't real. You may recall Felix Baumgartner's Red Bull jump from a couple of years ago, if that name rings a bell. Most people are completely unaware of this, especially the mainstream media. There was an instance last year when the University of Leicester in Great Britain launched a balloon with a fish-eyed camera lens, and it capped out a couple of thousand feet high. And lo and behold, there was planet Earth below. The whole ball, in one frame, viewed from a balloon launched by prepubescent children. I think not. Yet, every big paper in the UK and the rest of the world just ran with that story. Students capture the curvature of the Earth. Awe and behold. The ignorance is astounding. Yes. I guess you're right, murmured John deftly. His words echoed in the spacious study of Celeste Wood. The room became dead silent, and the post-debate exhaustion felt palpable for everyone. It's like the eerie silence after the eve of a great battle, when the sound of trumpets and cannons fade, and you try to make sense of it all, as you sit on the porch and watch the sun rise through the haze. Well, my friends. Enough for one day. I should return to my duties, announced Celeste. John gave William a nod, who snapped out of his slumber and went for his coat. John did the same. Yes, I think it is time. Celeste opened the door and extended her hand. John shook it. I am not sure what to make of all this, Professor. It's all a mist right now. I need to let it sink in. But what I can tell you here and now already is that this has been one of the most memorable debates I have ever had in my life. An astrophysicist attempting to convince me that outer space is fake and that the globe I have called home for 26 years isn't real. Not exactly something you can anticipate happening. Have you always been conspiratorial, or did you fall down through this pit recently? You don't strike me as the type. Alas, I have not always been this cynical. The cynicism and pessimism towards humanity is an understanding that took me many years to grasp. I was once as blissfully unaware as any Jane Doe, and I would have not only dismissed these conspiracy theories instantly. I would have been angered and outraged by such twisted illogical thinking. Whether it was John F. Kennedy assassination theories, September 11th, or Sandy Hook theories, I would have dismissed them all. But when you are faced with the fact that we do live in an utterly fabricated world, ruled by a sociopathic power elite, then everything is possible. Every single piece of history that matters needs to be looked into closely and re-evaluated. The Shadow Elite, the powers that ought not be, will pull absolutely no punches when it comes to establishing control over the masses. So you became a believer in disguise, said William. Slowly but steadily. Well, it's a good thing you didn't go off and announce it to the world. You would have been ostracized and sacked before you could even blink. Yes, quite. Or attended the Flat Earth Conference in Denver last year. William shuddered. Or even worse. Joined the Flat Earth Society. What's the Flat Earth Society? Asked John. Oh, it's a ridiculous disinformation page about the Flat Earth theory, which somehow makes it to the top of every Google search. It's a farce that nobody takes seriously. The problem is that they do mix in some real information there and blend it together with absolute horse manure, forming a diluted soggy mess of a cocktail indeed, clarified William. The Flat Earth Society claims that the Earth disk is constantly rising upwards as some kind of kindergarten explanation for the force we call gravity. It's a childish page set up to muddy the waters. An old ploy, it is. Misleading people is easiest if you blend true information together with absolute falsities, said Celeste. William nodded. It scares the newcomers away. And very efficiently so. Either way, I enjoyed this audience a great deal, said John. Audience. Again, I'm not the Pope. I told you as much. Did I rattle your cage today? I would be disappointed if not. The winds of change are in the air, and who knows what the future will bring. I don't know how many years this thing will keep brewing unchallenged, how the power elite will deal with an awoken mass of people. I shudder to think of it in fact. What I do know is that we walk the earth in a most curious of times, and I am lucky to be alive. I agree, said John and walked out the door. Farewell, Professor. Out by the courtyard, the two of them shivered in the cold. It was 4 o'clock, and it was pitch black outside. Guided by the dim lanterns glowing in the dark, they made their way off the university grounds. How about a drink, old friend? Stuttered William. I don't know if we are old friends, my friend, but I wouldn't say no to a cold one, especially not after this lecture of our lives. Lead the way. They walked Valhalla Vagan for a minute or two and turned left at the crossing towards Edengaton. It was bone-chillingly cold, and John couldn't wait to get into the warmth. Just pick a place already. After making their way even further down Edengaton, William finally settled on a place. He nodded towards a murky joint called the Flying Horse. The place was half empty, and finding empty seats was an easy task. A jazz song was playing deftly in the gloomy locale, and the bartender didn't even look them in the eyes as they ordered 2 large India Pale Ales. There's more cheer in a graveyard. William took a large sip of the beer and breathed a sigh of relief. A warm place, at last. I guess we'll live to fight another day. A few more minutes out there, and I would have keeled over with hypothermia. John made an approving gesture. I will never understand why our ancestors settled down up here instead of just going south. Why did they not set up shop in France or Spain? They must have come here at summertime, which deceived them. Maybe they were completely unaware that the polar opposite, pun intended, would be upon them in just a couple of months. John made a vague attempt of a knowing grin and fell into silence. He drifted away from the pub and contemplated. His mind wandered back to the study of Celeste Wood. Where are we? Where are we, and where did we come from? I had never thought of that until I got caught up in this. How do we really know what's underneath our feet, thousands of miles below? Clever as a fox, wasn't she? Professor Wood, said William. Yes, I am still shaken up by the whole ordeal. And it's Celeste. She wanted us to call her Celeste. I know. I thought of something she told me, at the end. Celeste. What did she tell you? You had already walked out of the room. Before she bade us farewell, she halted me on the doorstep. Yes, and? What did she say? They are the few, and we are the many. But we cannot reshape this world until it is unequivocally proven. Until then, the sheep will stay dormant, and the deception will continue. Someone needs to wake them up. Interesting. Well, I can see her point. If the earth is truly flat, then maybe what this movement would need is something game-changing that rocks the status quo. Because until then, my friend, the population of Earth will continue dismissing this movement, however large it may grow. The vast majority, anyway, said John. What you just said. It's old news to me. I came to the realization that something truly remarkable needs to take place if the old powers should one day fall. John said nothing. So, are you convinced then? Surely, you are at the very least on the fence. If you are being intellectually honest about this, there is no way in hell you can dismiss the preponderance of evidence in favor for the fact that we have in fact been lied to about the very nature of our reality. You have a million questions still left unanswered, I know, but one day, I hope all will be answered. John stared down the glass of beer and watched the tiny bubbles rise to the surface of the yellow liquid. What do I believe? I feel like I don't even know myself any longer. I don't know, William. That is the ugly truth. I honestly don't know. What I do know is that there are questions that I had until now never posed that I do want answered. I demand to see them answered, in fact. The impossible idea has become possible. Gosh, I can't even believe that I am talking about this. The most notorious idea ever conceived, the most hated, ridiculed worldview a person might have. But here I am, lost in the maelstrom. The earth might just be flat. Jesus. But I still cling on to the hope that there could be another reason as to why they are deceiving us. I hope the earth is a sphere. Oh, I hope so too. And I would gladly go back to the globe if presented with undeniable evidence in favor of the ball. If a moment like that would emerge, I would have to accept reality and confess that I was wrong. I am not in this game to be intellectually dishonest, nor do I have some kind of urge for being contrarian. Maybe just a little bit though. What do you mean? Asked William. There might be a sliver of truth to the notion that you like being a contrarian, that you cherish the feeling of being special, said John with a hint of a smile. Maybe a sliver. But like I said, I am not in this game for that. I want the truth. And I'm glad you refer to the earth as a sphere, and not round, which the imbeciles do. The fact that supposed geniuses like Tyson, Cox, and Kaku refer to the earth as round is embarrassing. An item can be both round and flat at the same time. However, those are just semantics and pesky nitpickings. Like I said, I am not in this game because I want to feel edgy or try to police semantics for that matter. I am a truth seeker and I am completely serious about it. I want change, real change. And I seek to achieve just that, on my own, or if fate so wills it, with a companion. I have a plan, John. A plan I've mused over for quite some time, well before I brought you to Celeste. As William was prone towards theatrics, he paused dramatically before continuing. As you may know, I am more or less financially independent. William chuckled. Yes. More or less. Which means that I have the opportunity to achieve certain things that most people could only dream of. And I intend to use them. Spend all your money? On what? John, you are my friend. We haven't known one another for long, but despite the element of brevity in our friendship, I still feel more attached to you than I do towards most people I have known for years. Those people are nothing to me. Lemmings, the whole lot. Over the past couple of years, I have drifted through life aimlessly with a numb feeling in my heart. Luxury and materialistic possessions mean little to me now. Those are empty pleasures. I mean, gorging away on the finest lobsters on New Year's Eve is fine and dandy and all, but at the end of the day you need something to strive for, to get you out of bed in the morning. I have that little something in sight now, and I intend to make my mark on the world. He paused again and gazed outside the window as the snows had started to fall again. Most people are not like me though. They are happy enough with having a job, a roof over their heads, and a family to love. And I think this current state of humanity. I think that is why the true nature of our world is being concealed from us. The vast majority of Earth's population is thriving. Things are better than they ever have been, generally speaking. With this knowledge in mind, why would the powers that be lift the veil at this point, even if they felt morally obliged? They can't do it at this point. It is way, way too late. They know that we would not cope with it. There would be riots in the street, blood, mayhem, and anarchy. If the world would change to the better one day in the future, it would come after a long stretch of hardship. Have you seen the comic book film called Watchmen? Yeah. Many years ago, don't remember too much about it. Well, if you would remember it, you would hearken back to the memorable ending. What happens in the end is that the main characters decide to tell a lie in order to keep the world peace and prevent a nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union. And herein lies the conundrum. Is telling a lie so gargantuan ever justified, even if it assures stability and prosperity in the known world? That is the question, because while the motive might be understandable and commendable, a lie is still a lie. A lie is still a lie, even if it benefits society. A lie is still a lie, even if the whole world believes it. And something that is true is still the truth, even if the world denounces it. And just like Rorschach and Watchmen, I cannot accept the idea of living a lie. We don't know where we are right now, for God's sake. We don't know where we are. Let that sink in. John downed the very last drops of his ale and pondered. What if you're wrong though? What if all of this is just a product of paranoia, and a bunch of people banding together and overthinking things? Are you equating the flat earth awakening with a cult? Not necessarily. Just saying that one should be careful with following a fringe hive mind. It's hard to know that you are living inside a bubble until you burst it. Yeah, I see what you are saying. And like I said before, I do hope I am wrong. But I know better, and you should too. Come on man. After what you just heard from her. Do you really think we are spinning and cruising around at these insane speeds they are telling us, when we are sitting here drinking our beers without a care in the world? Do you really think that it is a mere happenstance that there are no real pictures of Earth? We both know that the helio-nonsensical model is an insult to the intelligence of any skeptic with an open mind. But even if you are right, or dare I say we, in this case, what could we possibly do about it? We are just two guys drinking our sorrows away in a depressing pub. How could we change the world, you and I? William removed his glasses and placed them right in front of him on the table. By launching the most daunting expedition in modern history, beyond all hope or reason. If successful, we will be remembered for years to come. But it is not glory or fame that should guide us through our lofty quest. It is the thirst of knowledge, the search for truth. And right here and now, this is what every fiber in my body is telling me is the right thing to do. To prove, unquestionably, that the earth is created by intelligent design, and that we are not a speck of dust on a road to nowhere, lost in the empty sea called infinite space. John was dazzled by his grandiose way with words, and yet puzzled about what he really meant. How in God's name could we ever prove such a thing? William now stared in his eyes as intensely as any man could. He's dead serious about this. It's as if he is trying to pierce through my soul, hoping that I will be on board with this. I have decided to hire a crew, which will be the cream of the crop, handpicked for this expedition. I have yet to decide how exactly they will be selected, or how many I want involved, later with that. And I will make use of the very best material and mechanics that I know of. I will bring them all down there, as we head south. Where's south? As far south as south goes. John suddenly understood, and it sent a cold shiver down his spine. Oh my God. You want to head down to Antarctica? Yes. The winter period down there starts in June, so we better hurry, unless you fancy finding yourself in the midst of snowstorms, at temperatures of -60 degrees Celsius or worse. We are in mid-January now. I have something that most other like-minded folks lack. Money, time, and fighting spirit. I offer you and the world all three. The expedition needs to be underway in a few weeks from now, or, at the latest, 2 or 3 months from this day onwards. So, John, the only thing I ask you is this. I know what you will ask of me. Will you accompany me on this journey of a lifetime? The potentially most important expedition ever taken, as well as the most treacherous one. Given the satanic powers we are likely to face, if this indeed is the deception of an age, which I predict it is, you can guess that it will be no easy task for us down there, not to mention the other devilry in store for us down there, like the treacherous weather. John stuttered. He could not speak a word. If your faith in the heliocentric model is as unwavering as it is for the average person, as absolute and unquestionable as it once was for me, then what do you have to lose? Come with me, and I promise you that we will find out if your devout belief system that you have cherished and lived by your entire life matches reality.